The harbor at La Rochelle was supposed to come alive with the sounds of morning, the creak of ropes, the slap of water against hulls, the murmur of sailors preparing for the day. But this morning there was nothing. The Templar fleet, once anchored in this bustling port, had vanished without a trace. No struggle, no signs of violence, just empty docks and an oppressive silence, as if the ships had never existed. As the first men arrived to inspect the scene, confusion and disbelief turned to something darker. The Templars had slipped away in the night, but where had they gone and why? The answers lay hidden in the fog. Before sunrise, the harbor should have been alive. La Rochelle always woke early. Even before the bells rang, even before the gulls began their endless arguing over scraps, the port breathed. Ropes creaked. Water slapped against hulls. Men moved through the fog with practiced purpose, their boots knowing every plank by memory. Ships were never truly still here. They shifted, sighed, answered the tide. But on this morning the harbor was wrong. The fog lay thick and unmoving, like a held breath. Lantern light revealed empty water where dark silhouettes should have been. No masts cut the mist. No banners stirred. The docks stretched outward into nothing, as if they had been built for ships that no longer existed. The Knights Templar fleet was gone. Not damaged, not burned, not seized, simply absent. The men who arrived first stood in silence. Some rubbed their eyes, convinced they had come to the wrong pier. Others walked farther along the quay, counting berths, retracing steps they had taken the night before. Each step made the truth heavier. Every space was empty. Every mooring rope untied cleanly. No broken planks. No blood. No struggle. An entire fleet vanished between nightfall and dawn. La Rochelle was not a forgotten fishing village at the edge of the world. It was one of the most important Atlantic ports in medieval France, watched by royal officials, merchants, dockworkers, and guards. Ships did not leave unnoticed, especially not these ships. These vessels belonged to the most powerful military order in Christendom. They carried the Red Cross. They carried wealth, authority, and secrets whispered about but never written down. And now they carried none of it because they were gone. Word spread fast, faster than the tide. By mid-morning, the docks were crowded with men who should not have been there yet. Royal agents, clerks, church officials, merchants pretending indifference. Questions rose like birds startled into flight. When did they leave? How many ships were there? Who gave the order? No one had answers. What made the silence unbearable was not just the disappearance itself, but the timing. Across France, at that very moment, doors were being kicked in. Knights were being dragged from beds. Brothers who had sworn their lives to God were being shackled like criminals. On the king's command, the order of the temple was collapsing in a single coordinated strike, swift, ruthless, absolute. Except at the sea. Somehow, somewhere, the Templars had moved first. To understand why this moment mattered, why empty water in a quiet harbor would echo through centuries, you have to imagine what those ships represented. They were not just wood and sail. They were escape routes, lifelines, arteries carrying the hidden blood of an order that had grown too powerful to survive in daylight. For nearly 200 years, the Knights Templar had stood at the center of the medieval world. They had guarded pilgrims on dusty roads. They had fought and bled in the Holy Land. They had prayed at dawn and sharpened swords at dusk. And while kings rose and fell, the Templars endured, disciplined, secretive, and terrifyingly efficient. They were monks with weapons, bankers with armor, warriors who answered not to crowns, but to God alone. That independence made them useful. It also made them dangerous. By the early 14th century, the Templars had become something unprecedented, a transnational power. They owned land across Europe. They moved money faster and more securely than any crown. Kings borrowed from them, popes relied on them, and slowly, resentment curdled into fear, especially in France. King Philip IV was drowning in debt. Wars, ambition, and the cost of ruling had hollowed out the royal treasury. The Templars were creditors, and creditors do not inspire gratitude when repayment becomes impossible. What followed was not an accident of history. It was a calculated move, a purge dressed in righteousness. Accusations were prepared in secret. Heresy, blasphemy, devil worship. Crimes so shocking they would justify anything that came next. And yet, when the trap finally closed, something went wrong. The Templars on land were caught. The Templars at sea were not. The question is not simply where the ships went. It is how the order knew to move them at all. There were no phones, no mass messengers, no sudden proclamations. The arrests were meant to be a surprise, so tightly controlled that even many of the men carrying them out had no idea what they were about to do until the night before. And still, the fleet vanished. This suggests something deeply unsettling. The Templars either anticipated their own destruction, or they were warned from inside the very machinery meant to destroy them. If they fled, they did so with purpose. Ships are not moved in panic without leaving traces behind. Crews must be assembled, supplies gathered, routes chosen, cargo loaded. Cargo. That word alone opens a door historians have argued over for centuries. Because if the Templars left La Rochelle, they did not leave empty-handed. Official records claimed the order's immense wealth was seized. Gold, silver, relics, documents, all accounted for. And yet, when the king's men took control of Templar properties, they found far less than expected. Vaults that should have been heavy were bare. Chests that should have overflowed were empty. Something had already been moved. Standing on the dock that morning, staring into fog where the ships should have been, no one could say what had been taken. But they could feel the absence. It was the kind of absence that presses on the chest, that makes the air feel thinner. An absence that feels intentional. Imagine the night before. Lanterns shuddered. Voices kept low. Sails unfurled without ceremony. Men who had trained their entire lives to obey orders receiving one final command. Not to fight, not to defend, but to leave. No farewells. No records. No witnesses who would speak. The tide would have carried them westward, out into darkness, toward a horizon medieval maps warned people not to trust. And then nothing. No reports of wreckage washing ashore. No sightings by rival ports. No intercepted messages. The sea swallowed the story whole. Within days, the narrative was rewritten. Attention shifted to trials, confessions extracted under torture, and flames rising over Paris. The disappearance of the fleet became an inconvenience, then a footnote, then silence. History, after all, is often written by those who remain on land. But the sea does not forget so easily. Every theory that followed, Scotland, Portugal, hidden sanctuaries, even lands beyond the known world, was born in that quiet harbor at dawn. In the moment when powerful men realized that despite all their planning, something essential had slipped through their fingers. Not just ships. Possibility. Because if the Templars escaped, then the destruction of the order was incomplete. If they escaped with knowledge or wealth or proof of something dangerous, then the story we tell about the end of the Knights Templar is not an ending at all. It is an interruption. And the most haunting part is this: whatever happened next, whoever boarded those ships knew they might never return. They were not sailing toward glory. They were sailing toward uncertainty, exile, perhaps erasure. Yet they went anyway. Which forces a final question to surface, quiet but relentless, one that will guide everything that follows. What secret is powerful enough that men sworn to God, to home, and to brotherhood would choose the open sea over the known world, and vanish without a trace? The date was etched into history, though few at the time could have grasped its full weight. Friday, the 13th of October, 1307. The morning was gray. A thin drizzle misting over the cobbled streets of Paris, softening the edges of the city, but not the sharpness of what was about to unfold. For centuries, the Templars had been untouchable, perched between divine authority and earthly power. Their robes white as snow and their crosses crimson as the blood they had spilled in the Holy Land. They had sworn oaths to God, but they had also learned to wield influence like a blade, careful, precise, deadly. And now, all that power had made them a target. It was the perfect trap, or at least it seemed perfect to those who had conceived it. King Philip IV of France, burdened by debt and jealousy, had been planning this day for months. He had amassed spies, informants, and loyalists in every major city where the Templars had a house, a commandery, or a stronghold. Rumors whispered among the clergy, scribes, and merchants. Carefully seeded, carefully manipulated, set the stage. Stories of heresy, blasphemy, and devil worship had circulated for years, their credibility growing in the fertile soil of fear and suspicion. The dawn that day was deceptively quiet. Paris seemed ordinary. People went about their business, unaware that a storm was rolling over the city. One not of clouds, but of men armed with warrants, horses, and iron shackles. In the Templar houses, doors were barred as usual, candles burned low, and the knights performed their morning prayers, unaware, or perhaps in denial, that their fate had already been sealed. Some sensed a tension in the air, a subtle shift, but none could articulate it. The first knock on the door came before the sun had fully risen, a sharp, deliberate pounding that echoed in the stone corridors. The arrests were swift, brutal, and shocking in their coordination. Men were dragged from their beds, bound, and thrown into waiting wagons. The screams of resistance were muffled by the heavy mist. Brothers who had trained for years in the art of war, knights who had faced Saracen armies, pirates, and siege engines, found themselves powerless against this invisible, bureaucratic force. The irony was suffocating. They had survived battles that could have shredded empires, but they could not survive the calculated wrath of a king and his network of spies. It was not just the physical arrests that mattered. It was the psychological blow. Imagine waking to the sound of boots on stone, knowing that your life, your order, your legacy could be erased in an instant. Families of the Templars, who were accustomed to the rigor and discipline of the order, watched helplessly. Some tried to resist, but resistance was met with fire and steel, with promises of damnation or death. In that moment, the Templar world, a world that had seemed unshakable, was crumbling. The cruelty of the plan was in its precision. The arrests were simultaneous across France, leaving no one time to warn their brothers, no one time to gather their resources, no one time to hide what could be hidden. Every commandery, from the bustling hubs in Paris and La Rochelle to the remote estates in Provence, felt the same shock. Betrayal had arrived at their doorstep. And yet, even in the midst of this chaos, there were whispers of escape. Not all Templars were captured. Not all were in their beds. Some vanished into the night, slipping through the gaps in the king's plan. This is where the story becomes strange, almost unbelievable. While the order was being struck down on land, their fleet, the very ships that had been moored at La Rochelle, laden with goods, treasure, and perhaps secrets too dangerous to remain in France, was already on the move. How could this have happened? How could the fleet vanish when the men on shore were ensnared? It hints at foreknowledge, planning, perhaps even betrayal within betrayal. The Templars had trained for war, yes, but they had also mastered patience, observation, and timing. Perhaps they had anticipated this day, long before the king thought to strike. Perhaps they had allies in unexpected places. What followed was a cascade of confusion and fear. Letters were sent to distant commanderies, only to arrive too late. Men who had sworn loyalty to the king were confronted with the impossible. The Templars had disappeared from the coast, leaving behind only the echo of their presence. Ships that should have been seized were gone. Cargoes that should have been captured were missing. The king's wrath, meticulously prepared, met only empty docks and unanswered questions. Every chronicler who tried to write about these events faced the same challenge. How do you record the disappearance of a fleet that leaves no trace, in the middle of a purge that consumes thousands? Some accounts describe ships sailing under moonlight, their sails black as sin. Others hint at convoys slipping out under storm clouds, invisible to the human eye but guided by knowledge, skill, and perhaps divine providence. None of it can be verified, and yet the consistency of reports is unsettling. Something extraordinary had occurred, something that did not fit neatly into the history that kings and chroniclers preferred to tell. And then there were the rumors, the kind that grow like vines around a ruined castle, that some knights had taken sacred relics, that gold, silver, and manuscripts had been secreted aboard the ships, that knowledge too dangerous for any mortal to hold had been ferried across the Atlantic. These whispers were never confirmed, but they would haunt Europe for centuries. Every sudden rumor of Templar activity, every mysterious map, every unexplained artifact in distant lands seemed to tie back to that single impossible moment, the night the king struck and the fleet disappeared. Philip IV's personal humiliation cannot be overstated. Here was a king who had bent the entire machinery of France to his will. He had spies, loyal knights, churchmen, and bureaucrats working day and night to extinguish a power he feared. Yet, when he arrived at the ports to secure the Order's assets, he found nothing. The Templars had anticipated the attack, or at the very least exploited a weakness in the king's meticulous plan. His fury was private, smoldering, and devastating. He could arrest knights, burn castles, seize properties, but he could not seize what had slipped beyond his reach. This was more than a military loss. It was a psychological one, a blow to the very idea that a king could control destiny. The Templars had become ghosts, a lesson etched in fog, in tide, in the empty silence of a harbor. And the implications were staggering. If the fleet had vanished, where had it gone? Who commanded it? What secrets had been carried away in the night? Each question led only to deeper uncertainty. To understand the full weight of this day, one must imagine the Templars themselves. They were not simply fleeing. They were choosing a path that demanded discipline, courage, and sacrifice. Families would be left behind. Brothers would be scattered. The certainty of death hung like a shadow over each decision. And yet they moved step by careful step toward the unknown. Their disappearance was not merely an escape. It was an act of defiance against the forces that sought to erase them. The arrests of October 13th were meant to be absolute. They were meant to destroy the order in a single sweeping stroke. Yet, for those who had ears to hear and eyes to see, there was an undeniable truth. The Templars, at least some of them, had chosen the sea over chains. And in that choice, they became something more than knights. They became a mystery, one that would ripple across generations. Even today, historians debate how it could have happened. Was it foresight, luck, or betrayal that allowed the fleet to slip away? Was it the brilliance of the Templar commanders, or a flaw in the king's meticulously laid plans? No one can say with certainty, but the events of that morning, etched into the minds of those who witnessed them, left a mark as indelible as ink on parchment or steel on stone. The day closed with a sense of unreality. Paris went about its business, unaware that history had shifted beneath its feet. Knights languished in dungeons. Churches whispered of heresy. And across the Atlantic horizon, sails cut through fog, carrying men, treasure, and perhaps secrets that no crown could claim. Friday, the 13th of October, 1307, was meant to be the end of the Templars. Instead, it was the beginning of a story that would refuse to die. A story written not in books or ledgers, but in the empty echoes of harbors, the uncharted waves of the ocean, and the whispered questions of those who dared to ask. What if some things cannot be destroyed, no matter how hard the world tries? The king had struck. The order had fallen. And yet, somewhere out there, beyond the sight of every spy, beyond the reach of every royal decree, the Templars were still moving. Invisible, undefeated, vanished but not gone. The sea was always more than water to the Templars. It was not merely a route for travel or trade. It was a lifeline, a moving artery that connected their scattered holdings from the coasts of France to the distant shores of the Holy Land. While most historians remember the Templars as warriors of the Crusades, their true power often lay in their mastery of the waves. Ships were not just vessels. They were extensions of the order itself, tools of strategy, secrecy, and survival. And it was this mastery of the sea that may have saved them from annihilation when the king's forces moved to destroy them. To understand why, one must first look at the geography of medieval Europe. France, with its jagged Atlantic coastline, offered 1,000 hiding places for ships, coves where a vessel could vanish behind cliffs, and rivers that carried one deep into the interior before anyone could notice. La Rochelle, in particular, was a jewel in the Templars' network of ports. Its wide harbor and access to both the Atlantic and the inland riverways made it ideal for trade and discreet departures alike. From here, one could reach England, Portugal, or the far reaches of the Mediterranean, all without ever touching hostile territory. The Templars had built this network over decades. Every port, every dock, every shipyard was known to them in detail. They maintained their own fleet, not vast by modern standards but formidable for the era. These were not merchant vessels alone. They were swift, armed, and capable of carrying both men and treasure. Chronicles from the time, sparse and often contradictory, hint at their scale. 30, perhaps 50 ships that could be mobilized quickly. Each had its purpose, each crew trained in more than navigation. They were trained in tactics, secrecy, and, if necessary, evasion. What made the sea so critical was its ability to mask intentions. On land, a fortress could be besieged, walls torn down, men captured or killed. At sea, no one could predict your path, your timing, or even your destination. The Templars understood this better than any contemporary ruler. The ships were not simply defensive tools. They were instruments of mobility and contingency. They carried not only gold and supplies but also the most sensitive treasures of the order. Texts, relics, and perhaps knowledge that could not fall into the wrong hands. It is worth imagining the tension in the days leading up to October 1307. Perhaps the fleet lay at anchor in La Rochelle, sails furled, crews waiting silently, knowing that the king's men were preparing to strike. Maybe they had received warnings through trusted channels. A monk in Avignon sending coded letters. A merchant loyal to the order tipping them off about troop movements. Whatever the source, the Templars would have understood that their survival required more than courage. It demanded strategy, timing, and mastery of the sea that few could match. Ships cannot vanish by accident. The sea is merciless. The currents are unforgiving. Storms do not care for human plans. For the fleet to disappear without a trace suggests an extraordinary level of skill and preparation. Men had to be ready, provisions stored, routes charted, and contingencies considered for every possible danger. They could not rely on luck alone. Every rope, sail, and oar would have been tested and retested, every man knowing his role down to instinct. Consider the cargo. Historians argue endlessly over what the Templar ships may have carried. Gold, certainly, but also something less tangible yet infinitely more dangerous. Knowledge. Documents that recorded loans, treaties, the movement of armies, perhaps even forbidden texts or maps of lands beyond the known world. Some sources whisper of relics, objects sacred enough that their loss would have caused scandal in the church. The implication is clear. The fleet was moving not just people or treasure, but power itself. And power, once at sea, could be preserved in ways that castles and fortresses could not protect. La Rochelle that October would have been a study in quiet chaos. Men loading cargo, the smell of tar and salt in the air, the tension of anticipation pressing on the shoulders of every knight and sailor. By nightfall, the harbor would have been transformed into a web of shadowed activity. Lanterns flickering, lines secured, supplies moved with care, all orchestrated with the precision of a symphony. Any misstep could doom the fleet. Any delay could alert the king's agents. And yet, by dawn, the ships were gone, as if swallowed by the sea itself. What happened next remains the greatest enigma of this episode. No wreckage was found. No royal ships intercepted them. It was as if the Templars had not sailed into the ocean but into a different dimension of history, leaving the world behind. Contemporary accounts, sparse and often written by hostile chroniclers, struggle to make sense of the fleet's disappearance. Some suggest they were bound for England, to safe harbors controlled by sympathetic lords. Others whisper of Portugal, where the Templars would later re-emerge under a different guise. There are even hints, more controversial, that they may have crossed the Atlantic centuries before Columbus, seeking lands that were beyond the maps of their time. Regardless of the route, the psychological effect of the fleet's disappearance was immense. Philip IV had intended to crush the Templars completely, demonstrating to Europe that no power could stand against the crown. Instead, the king discovered the limits of his control. On land, he could imprison and execute. On the sea, his reach ended. An entire network of men, ships, and resources had slipped from his grasp. The empty harbor at La Rochelle became a symbol not just of what had been lost, but of what could not be contained. There is a human dimension to this as well. Imagine the men aboard those ships. Knights, sailors, perhaps servants or scholars, all thrust into a perilous journey. They were leaving behind homes, comrades, and lives they had known for decades. The choice to set sail into uncertainty was an act of faith, courage, and desperation. And yet, the sea offered a promise that no fortress could. A chance at survival, a chance to preserve what mattered most, a chance to escape the jaws of a king who would not hesitate to destroy them. This intersection of human courage and maritime mastery is what makes the story so compelling. It is easy to picture the Templars as rigid, pious warriors, but at sea, they were something else entirely. Navigators, tacticians, and opportunists who understood that knowledge and movement could outmatch brute force. Every knot tied, every sail hoisted, every course plotted was an act of defiance. The ocean became their ally, a force that concealed and protected them while history was being rewritten behind their backs. And yet, the sea is indifferent. Storms could scatter fleets. Pirates could intercept them. Disease could decimate crews. That the Templar fleet survived, at least long enough to vanish into legend, speaks to extraordinary discipline and perhaps luck beyond comprehension. It also hints at preparation that few could achieve. A fleet built not only to transport but to endure, to evade, and to conceal. By the time the king's men realized what had happened, it was already too late. Ships that should have been captured had melted into the mist. Harbors that should have been occupied were empty. And the stories that would follow, the whispers of Templars in distant lands, the rumors of hidden treasures, the speculation about knowledge lost to time, began here in the fog over La Rochelle, where water and courage met to conceal an impossible disappearance. The mastery of the sea, then, was not just about ships or tides. It was about foresight, planning, and human will. It was about knowing that when land could no longer protect, the ocean could. And it was about understanding that history itself could be manipulated, not with swords or politics, but with movement, secrecy, and the vast, unpredictable canvas of the Atlantic. Every map drawn afterward, every chronicler's account, every later historian who tried to track the Templars would begin here. With a fleet that left at night, slipping past the watchful eyes of a king, a fleet that vanished without a trace. What it carried, gold, knowledge, relics, or merely the survival of an order, remains unknown. What is certain is that the sea, in its infinite and indifferent expanse, became the stage for one of history's most daring and enigmatic escapes. The Templars were no longer simply knights of Christendom. On that morning, they became a story in motion, a force that defied not just capture but the very logic of the world around them. The sea was their refuge, their weapon, their secret. And as they sailed away from La Rochelle, they transformed what might have been an ending into a mystery that would endure for centuries, haunting scholars, inspiring legends, and challenging the limits of what is known about power, secrecy, and survival. The story of the Knights Templar always begins with a paradox. They were both humble and extraordinary, monks yet warriors, sworn to poverty yet masters of wealth. Their beginnings were so unassuming that it seems almost impossible they could rise to the heights they eventually reached. Picture Jerusalem in the aftermath of the First Crusade, 1119, a city that had been carved from stone and blood, where pilgrims traveled across deserts under constant threat of bandits and violence. Into this volatile world stepped a group of 9 men, led by a French knight named Hugues de Payens. They took a vow unlike any other, to protect pilgrims, to uphold God's law, and to live simply. Their white mantles, marked with a red cross, symbolized devotion, humility, and the willingness to die for their cause. It was not power or glory that defined their early days, but a sense of purpose rooted in survival. They slept in shared quarters, ate modestly, and carried out patrols on the roads leading to Jerusalem. The city was alive with the noise of markets and the cries of the wounded, yet beneath the surface, tension simmered. The Holy Land was a precarious place, where allegiances shifted like sand in the wind, and every pilgrim's journey could end in death. The Templars were there to intervene, to stand as guardians where kings and emperors could not reach, and to create order in chaos. Their first lodgings were meager, barely enough to accommodate the small band, but even then, they demonstrated a singular discipline. Every man had a role, every task a purpose. Prayer was as rigorous as sword training. Hunger was not a complaint but a test of endurance. Fear was acknowledged, then contained, for in the Holy Land, hesitation could be fatal. This foundation of discipline, forged in the crucible of daily peril, would become the bedrock of their power. Despite their humble beginnings, the Templars began to attract attention. Pilgrims spoke of their bravery. Nobles admired their dedication. And soon, the order began to receive donations. Lands were granted, castles entrusted, and with each gift, their influence grew. They were still monks, yet they began to acquire resources that many kings would have envied. Their income from donations, combined with prudent management, allowed them to fund fortifications, pay soldiers, and maintain their fleet. Each acquisition was subtle, almost unnoticeable, but collectively, it transformed the order from a small protective band into a continental force. The paradox deepened as their wealth grew. These men, who had vowed poverty, now controlled treasures beyond imagining. Gold and silver flowed into their coffers. Estates stretched across France, Spain, Portugal, and England. They built chapels, fortresses, and granaries. Yet outwardly they maintained the discipline of monks. The red cross on white mantles remained a symbol of humility, even as the Templars' reach extended into the palaces of kings and the halls of the papacy. The duality of their existence, warrior and monk, poor and rich, humble and formidable, allowed them to operate in a way that few others could. They became the invisible backbone of European power. Kings borrowed from them, merchants relied on them, armies depended on their logistical mastery. Yet the Templars remained distinct, their loyalty pledged not to any earthly ruler but to God and the order itself. This independence, while a source of strength, also seeded envy and suspicion. Power that answers only to itself is always dangerous to those who wish to control it. Their rise was not linear or inevitable. The early Templars faced skepticism, criticism, and outright hostility. Local lords sometimes saw them as interlopers, outsiders profiting from their lands. Bishops worried about a military order wielding wealth without ecclesiastical oversight. And yet, the Templars navigated these challenges with the same discipline they applied to warfare and prayer. They cultivated alliances, negotiated diplomatically, and demonstrated reliability in ways that built trust, until trust became dependence. It was their combination of faith and pragmatism that set them apart. Unlike mercenaries, the Templars fought not for payment but for a mission. Unlike traditional monks, they understood the mechanics of finance, logistics, and strategy. This hybrid nature made them indispensable. A king could seize lands, a noble could claim a castle, but the Templars could move armies, protect pilgrims, and even fund military campaigns across Europe. In essence, they became a hidden infrastructure, invisible yet essential, the veins through which the lifeblood of medieval Christendom flowed. And yet, their power was not without human cost. Behind the disciplined mantles were men who faced fear, doubt, and moral complexity. They witnessed death daily, endured harsh climates, and lived with the constant knowledge that their enemies would not hesitate to strike. The psychological weight of their mission was immense. They were often asked to make impossible choices: protect a caravan knowing they might be outnumbered, defend a fortress knowing reinforcements would not arrive, uphold a vow of obedience even when orders seemed to conflict with survival. The tension between duty and self-preservation was ever present, and it honed them into a collective capable of extraordinary resilience. The order's reputation grew with each victory and each successful mission. Tales spread of knights who had defended pilgrims from overwhelming odds, of fortresses that had withstood siege after siege, of diplomats who had negotiated peace between warring factions. Every story reinforced the aura of invincibility that surrounded them. To outsiders, they were nearly mythic, part of the divine machinery of God's will. To insiders, they were disciplined men who understood that survival depended on cohesion, secrecy, and unwavering commitment. It is crucial to understand that this early foundation, the humility, the discipline, the constant exposure to danger, was what allowed the Templars to later survive crises that would have destroyed lesser orders. The habits instilled in Jerusalem, the ability to operate under stress, the practice of moving resources discreetly, and the insistence on rigorous protocol, all of these would become essential during the greatest challenge they would ever face, the Purge of 1307. When the king's forces moved to destroy the order, the same discipline that had kept them alive on pilgrimage roads now enabled them to respond to an unprecedented threat. Some would be captured, others executed, but those prepared for action on land or sea could, and did, vanish, taking secrets, treasure, and perhaps knowledge with them. Their early lives also reveal the human heart behind the legend. Many knights joined not for ambition or wealth, but out of faith, a sense of purpose, and the desire to protect. They formed bonds deeper than those of blood, a brotherhood forged through shared danger and shared devotion. These relationships were tested repeatedly, in battle and in crisis, yet they endured. Loyalty was not a concept. It was a lived experience, carried through every march, every siege, and ultimately, every desperate decision to flee the king's wrath. The paradox of their beginnings, small and humble, yet capable of extraordinary influence, was also a paradox of perception. Outsiders saw the Red Cross and imagined piety alone. They did not grasp the cunning, the strategy, or the scope of their operations. Even kings and popes, who relied upon them, often underestimated the depth of their planning and the intelligence that underpinned every action. It was this miscalculation that would allow the fleet to disappear in 1307, unrecorded and unchallenged, while the men on land were captured or executed. From their first days in Jerusalem, the Templars had cultivated not just skill but foresight. They learned to anticipate threats, to plan for contingencies, and to move with precision. This mindset transformed them from humble guardians of pilgrims into a force capable of reshaping the political, financial, and even spiritual landscape of medieval Europe. Their beginnings, seemingly insignificant, contained the seeds of one of history's greatest mysteries. The fleet that vanished from La Rochelle, carrying with it wealth, knowledge, and a legacy that no king could fully erase. And so, the humble monks of Jerusalem, 9 men devoted to a cause they could scarcely imagine would grow beyond all bounds, became the architects of a network, a discipline, and a vision that reached across continents and centuries. Their origins, rooted in poverty, faith, and devotion, were not erased by power but amplified. They became something more than human, a force capable of defying kings, disappearing fleets, and leaving behind questions that would haunt history forever. The Knights Templar were no longer the small band of 9 men who had once patrolled the dusty roads of Jerusalem. Over the course of less than a century, they had transformed into an order that wielded influence across kingdoms, shaping politics, finance, and the course of wars. Their rise was not accidental, nor was it purely the result of martial prowess or divine favor. It was deliberate, disciplined, and ruthless, a careful weaving of faith, strategy, and opportunity that elevated them above kings and nobles alike. The first step in their ascent was visibility. While the Templars had begun as humble guardians, their successes could not be hidden. Stories of defended pilgrims, victorious skirmishes, and miraculous survival spread through Europe, carried by travelers, merchants, and clergy. These accounts were embellished, sometimes intentionally, to inspire faith and attract support, but they were also grounded in truth. The Templars had proved their value time and again. They had stabilized dangerous regions, secured trade routes, and provided a visible symbol of the Church's strength. Every success brought them not only reputation but tangible benefits: donations, land grants, and political leverage. This leverage was compounded by their unique organizational structure. Unlike feudal lords, whose power was fragmented and dependent on loyalty that could be bought or coerced, the Templars operated as a unified order, accountable first to their Grand Master and then to God. This hierarchy allowed them to mobilize resources efficiently, move money across borders, and respond to threats with a speed that feudal armies could not match. A king might need months to raise an army or negotiate a treaty. The Templars could act in days. Their independence was terrifying to rulers who relied on personal control and loyalty, and it allowed the order to operate as both an asset and a threat simultaneously. The financial acumen of the Templars was central to their rise. They developed an early form of banking that allowed nobles and kings to deposit money in one location and withdraw it elsewhere, often under the protection of armed escorts. Pilgrims and merchants alike relied on the order to safeguard funds and facilitate transactions. Castles and commanderies became vaults, not merely fortresses, while knights who once fought with swords now supervised treasuries, contracts, and ledgers. This control of wealth gave them leverage over rulers who depended on loans for wars and governance. Kings and popes found themselves beholden to an order that was technically subservient to the church but practically independent. Their rise was also strategic. They did not seek to dominate through sheer force but through influence. They negotiated treaties, mediated disputes, and established networks that crossed linguistic and cultural boundaries. Their presence could guarantee safe passage for trade, pilgrimage, or diplomacy. In many ways, they became the invisible infrastructure of medieval Europe, moving resources, knowledge, and people across borders while avoiding the scrutiny that might accompany overt political power. Their strength lay in subtlety, in the ability to be indispensable without appearing threatening, until, inevitably, someone underestimated them. The combination of martial skill, religious devotion, and financial savvy created an aura of invincibility. Pilgrims trusted them, nobles respected them, and kings feared them. Yet it was the careful cultivation of perception that amplified their influence. A Templar knight was more than a soldier. He was a symbol. The white mantle with the red cross was recognized across continents. It conveyed authority, devotion, and an implicit warning. The order answers to God, not man. The psychological power of this symbol was immense, and it was wielded with the same precision as their swords. As their influence grew, so did the tension surrounding them. Envy and fear followed the order wherever they went. Monarchs who once relied on the Templars for loans began to see them as rivals. Nobles who benefited from their protection also feared the order's autonomy. The more the Templars achieved, the more they attracted scrutiny. Their success was inseparable from the threats it generated. Philip IV of France, deeply in debt and desperate to consolidate power, would ultimately see the Templars not as allies but as obstacles to his ambition. By their very rise, the order had sown the seeds of its own persecution. Yet the Templars' rise was not merely a story of accumulation and influence. It was a story of adaptation. They had begun in the Holy Land, but when the Crusader states fell, they shifted their focus to Europe. They transformed their military experience into administrative expertise, turning castles and commanderies into hubs of economic and strategic activity. Their maritime skills, often overlooked, allowed them to transport goods and personnel across vast distances. Their ability to adapt to changing circumstances, political, economic, and military, was unparalleled. Where others faltered, the Templars thrived. The expansion of their holdings was carefully orchestrated. Estates were not acquired randomly but strategically, often positioned to control trade routes, rivers, or regions of political significance. Their castles were built not only as fortresses but as symbols of authority and as logistical centers. Farms, vineyards, and mills supported these centers, creating self-sufficient networks that could endure sieges and economic disruption. This combination of military, economic, and symbolic power made the Templars a force few could ignore. Perhaps most importantly, the order cultivated a culture of secrecy. Knowledge was power, and the Templars protected it fiercely. Documents, financial records, and military plans were carefully guarded, accessible only to those who needed to know. This secrecy fueled both their efficiency and their mystique. Outsiders could see their success but could not easily understand how it was achieved. This aura of impenetrability reinforced their influence, allowing them to operate above suspicion until they became too powerful to ignore. Human ambition and human relationships also played a role. The knights were bound by oaths not only to God but to each other. Loyalty was cultivated through shared hardship, shared danger, and shared purpose. Brothers who had faced death together were willing to trust one another in matters of finance, strategy, and secrecy. This cohesion made the order resilient, capable of withstanding challenges that would have fractured lesser organizations. It also allowed them to coordinate complex operations, whether moving treasure, negotiating treaties, or preparing for conflicts both seen and unseen. As the Templars expanded, they became indispensable. Kings relied on their fleets for transport, their treasuries for loans, and their soldiers for protection. The Pope relied on them to maintain order in the Holy Land and in Europe. Merchants relied on them to protect trade and move funds securely. The order's reach extended across borders, yet it remained singular in focus, disciplined in purpose, and unparalleled in execution. But the very qualities that made the Templars indispensable also made them vulnerable. Independence breeds suspicion. Power that is not visibly accountable breeds envy. Their rise, so carefully managed and so meticulously executed, inevitably drew the attention of a king who feared what he could not control. The same discipline and foresight that allowed the Templars to navigate the Holy Land and secure Europe's wealth could not, in the end, protect every brother from betrayal or arrest. Yet it was these qualities, discipline, foresight, secrecy, and adaptability, that allowed some to escape, to vanish, and to carry the order's legacy beyond the reach of kings. In essence, the Templars had become something far greater than their humble origins suggested. They were not merely monks or warriors. They were a hybrid of faith, strategy, and intelligence. Their rise was a deliberate orchestration of visibility, financial mastery, organizational discipline, and human loyalty. They had learned to operate in a world of competing powers, to become indispensable while remaining independent, and to wield influence without overtly challenging authority, until that very independence provoked the fury of a king. Their ascent teaches a crucial truth about power. It is not only the strength of arms or the depth of treasure that determines influence, but the combination of foresight, strategy, and adaptability. The Templars had cultivated all three. They had transformed from humble protectors into the hidden architects of European politics and finance. Their rise was extraordinary not because it was sudden, but because it was deliberate, disciplined, and ultimately unstoppable until history caught up with them. And so, when Philip IV moved against them, he was not merely attacking a military order. He was attempting to destroy a force that had outgrown conventional control, an organization whose power was woven into the very fabric of Europe. The rise of the Knights Templar was both their triumph and their undoing, a testament to human ambition, discipline, and ingenuity, and a prelude to the mystery and vanishing acts that would define their legacy. The fall of the Crusader states in the Holy Land marked a turning point for the Knights Templar. For decades, their identity had been defined by the defense of pilgrims, the fortification of castles, and the protection of sacred territories. Jerusalem, Acre, and the surrounding lands had been their proving grounds, the places where faith, strategy, and discipline fused into an unbreakable order. But as the last strongholds fell, the Templars were forced to confront a stark reality. Their world had shifted, and survival required adaptation. Their power would no longer be exercised solely on battlefields strewn with sand and blood, but in a Europe that was growing wealthier, more complex, and increasingly hostile. The loss of the Holy Land did not diminish the Templars' ambition. It simply redirected it. Their attention turned westward, toward the ports and rivers of Europe, where trade and travel flowed like lifeblood. These waterways became their new strategic arteries. Castles in the Levant had once served as bastions, but in Europe, a single ship could carry far more influence than a fortress. The Templars understood that mobility, secrecy, and financial acumen could compensate for the loss of territorial control. And so, they began to position themselves in key maritime hubs, investing in docks, shipyards, and fleets that would allow them to move resources and men with unprecedented speed. La Rochelle, perched on the French Atlantic coast, emerged as a focal point in this transformation. Its wide harbor, deep waters, and access to both inland and oceanic routes made it an ideal base of operations. The port had long been a center for trade, a meeting point for merchants, nobles, and travelers from across Europe. By establishing a presence there, the Templars could control a vital choke point, monitor maritime traffic, and, most importantly, maintain a fleet capable of rapid deployment. Ships at La Rochelle were not merely vessels. They were instruments of strategy, repositories of wealth, and vehicles for the Order's secrets. The Templars' adaptation to European maritime life was methodical. They built warehouses and granaries, stocked supplies for long voyages, and trained crews not only in navigation but in the art of evasion. They understood tides, winds, and currents in ways that few contemporaries could. Their ships were capable of carrying cargo and passengers, armed enough to defend against pirates, yet swift and maneuverable, designed to slip past blockades or hostile forces. Every detail was calculated, from the timing of departures to the selection of routes that would minimize exposure to danger while maximizing strategic advantage. Beyond practical considerations, the Templars recognized the psychological power of their maritime presence. A fleet of disciplined, armed ships in the Atlantic could serve as both a deterrent and a signal. It reminded monarchs, merchants, and rival orders that the Templars remained a force to be reckoned with, even as their strongholds in the Holy Land crumbled. The sea became a stage on which the Order could project influence without exposing itself to the vulnerabilities of land-based fortresses. This shift from land to sea also allowed the Templars to preserve their most valuable assets. Gold, silver, sacred relics, and documents containing sensitive knowledge could be transported discreetly. Where castles were vulnerable to siege, ships could vanish into fog, rivers, or the open ocean. The fleet became a lifeline, not just for survival, but for the continuation of the Order's power and influence. In times of crisis, it would be the fleet that allowed them to respond, regroup, or disappear entirely. The transformation was not purely strategic. It was deeply human. The Templars who had survived decades of conflict in the Holy Land carried with them a wealth of experience, discipline, resilience, and the ability to operate under extreme stress. These qualities translated seamlessly to maritime operations. The men who had defended Acre's walls could now navigate storms, evade pirates, and orchestrate complex logistical maneuvers. Their training, honed in the crucible of war, became a tool for survival in a world where political storms could be as deadly as any battlefield. La Rochelle itself became a microcosm of the Templars' evolving identity. Knights lived alongside sailors, clerics managed treasuries, and craftsmen maintained ships. It was a place of constant activity, where the line between military, economic, and administrative functions blurred. Every action was purposeful. Supplies were moved with discretion. Routes were planned to avoid unwanted attention. Even the local population, largely unaware of the full scope of Templar operations, could sense that something extraordinary was unfolding at the harbor. The Order had become invisible yet omnipresent, its influence threading through the port like an unseen current. Yet the transition to maritime power was not without risk. The sea is unpredictable. Storms could scatter fleets, disease could decimate crews, and rival powers could intercept ships. Navigational errors could lead to disaster. The Templars mitigated these risks through careful planning, redundant supply chains, and trained crews, but danger was never fully eliminated. Each voyage carried uncertainty, and each decision required foresight, courage, and the willingness to embrace risk for the sake of survival and continuity. It was in this environment that the Templars' dual nature, monk and warrior, strategist and executor, proved indispensable. Their discipline allowed them to operate efficiently under pressure. Their devotion provided a moral compass that guided decisions in moments of uncertainty. Their training ensured that men could act decisively when confronted with unexpected challenges. And their secrecy preserved the Order's most valuable assets, ensuring that wealth, knowledge, and influence could be carried safely from one port to the next. The significance of La Rochelle became tragically clear during the Purge of 1307. While knights across France were being arrested, tortured, or executed, the Templar fleet at the harbor was already in motion. Ships, fully provisioned and manned by loyal crews, slipped quietly from the docks, carrying men, treasure, and perhaps the most dangerous secrets of the Order. The disappearance was a testament to foresight and preparation. Where land-based power had been destroyed, Maritime power provided escape, continuity, and the preservation of influence. This shift also highlights the Templars' understanding of timing and coordination. Organizing a fleet to depart undetected required precision. Sails had to be unfurled at the right moment, crews had to act without hesitation, and routes had to be chosen to minimize exposure to patrols or hostile forces. The logistics of moving men and treasure simultaneously were immense. Yet the Templars accomplished it with the same discipline that had defined their rise, an orchestrated exodus that left no immediate trace, confounding the king's agents and altering the course of history. Beyond the practicalities, the fleet represented a symbol of resilience. While kings could arrest knights and burn commanderies, the sea offered freedom. It was a domain where the order's discipline and foresight could triumph over brute force. To lose La Rochelle would have been a disaster, but by maintaining control of the port and the fleet, the Templars ensured that even in the face of overwhelming persecution, they retained agency. The harbor became more than a location. It became a lifeline, a refuge, and a platform from which the Order could project power even as their enemies sought to erase them. The Templars' adaptation to Europe's maritime world also allowed them to influence distant lands. Trade routes became conduits of information, commerce, and influence. Ships carried not only material wealth but intelligence, correspondence, and strategic planning. The Order's presence in ports across France, Portugal, and Spain meant that their influence extended far beyond any single battlefield or fortress. They had transformed the act of navigation into a tool of survival and dominance, leveraging knowledge, discipline, and timing in ways few could comprehend. This maritime mastery was intimately connected to their identity. The Templars were not simply fleeing the fall of the Holy Land. They were asserting a principle that would define their legacy: adaptability in the face of existential threat. Land could be conquered, fortresses destroyed, and knights captured. But mobility, secrecy, and mastery of the sea provided a path to endurance. In this way, the Templars' evolution from crusader warriors to maritime strategists illustrates the breadth of their vision and the depth of their discipline. Every detail of La Rochelle, every ship, every supply crate, and every man aboard those vessels was part of a larger plan. The port and fleet were not passive assets. They were active participants in the Order's survival. When the king struck, the Templars were not caught unprepared. Their ships were already at sea, a moving embodiment of foresight, courage, and strategy. It was this ability to pivot, to transform a crisis into an opportunity, that set them apart from other orders, armies, and institutions. The lessons of La Rochelle extend beyond strategy and logistics. They reveal the human dimension of the Templars' power. The men aboard the ships faced uncertainty, isolation, and danger. They were leaving behind comrades, homes, and familiar worlds, embarking on a journey that might never end. Yet they moved with discipline and purpose, guided by loyalty, faith, and an understanding that the survival of the Order depended on their success. The harbor was their crucible, and the fleet their instrument, blending human courage with strategic mastery in a way that few had ever achieved. Ultimately, the shift from the battlefields of the Holy Land to the docks of La Rochelle represents the Templars' greatest adaptation. They transformed loss into opportunity, danger into mobility, and discipline into survival. Their fleets were more than ships. They were lifelines, symbols of resilience, and vehicles of influence that allowed the Order to endure when its terrestrial power was under siege. In every plank, rope, and sail, there was a story of foresight, courage, and human ingenuity that ensured the Templars would not vanish entirely, even as kings sought to erase them from history. La Rochelle became a testament to the Order's ability to reinvent itself, to thrive in new environments, and to harness the sea as a force equal to any army or fortress. It was a place where strategy, faith, and discipline converged, and where the seeds of one of history's greatest disappearances were sown. The fleet that sailed from that harbor would carry more than men and treasure. It would carry a legacy, a symbol of endurance, and a mystery that continues to haunt historians and dreamers alike. The Templars' fleet was more than a collection of ships. It was an instrument of strategy, secrecy, and survival, carefully cultivated over decades to serve the Order's needs. Unlike ordinary merchant vessels, these ships were designed for flexibility and purpose. Some were sleek and fast, capable of outrunning pirates or royal patrols. Others were larger, capable of carrying heavy cargo, treasure, and entire contingents of knights. Each vessel had a role, each crew a specialized function, and every journey was meticulously planned, with contingencies for storms, enemy ships, and the unpredictable moods of the Atlantic. At the heart of this maritime network was a philosophy that combined military discipline, religious devotion, and logistical intelligence. The Templars understood that a fleet was not just a means of transportation. It was a tool for preserving power and knowledge. On board a ship, a chest of gold was not merely wealth, it was leverage. A hidden document could be the key to political influence, a map the route to opportunity, and a carefully chosen crew the difference between survival and annihilation. Every voyage was therefore a strategic operation, with its success measured not only in the distance traveled but in what remained secure at the journey's end. The training of the crews reflected this philosophy. Knights and sailors were selected not just for strength or experience, but for reliability, intelligence, and the capacity to follow orders under stress. Discipline was absolute. Men trained in swordsmanship also learned navigation, emergency repair, and supply management. They practiced boarding maneuvers, signal communication, and evasive tactics. Their drills blurred the line between war and seamanship, creating a force that was versatile, adaptable, and capable of responding to threats both seen and unseen. Ships themselves were equipped for more than transport. Some carried hidden compartments for treasure and documents, ingeniously designed to evade prying eyes. Others were armed with light artillery or crossbows, enough to repel small attacks or deter would-be boarding parties. The fleet's strength lay not in overwhelming firepower but in the ability to move efficiently, disappear when needed, and carry vital assets safely across distances that ordinary armies could not traverse without months of preparation. The Templars' understanding of maritime geography was exceptional. They studied currents, winds, and tidal patterns with meticulous care, using knowledge passed down through generations. Ports, harbors, and river mouths were charted, not only for convenience but as strategic nodes. A single river could provide a hidden route deep into enemy territory, while a secluded cove could serve as a temporary sanctuary. Knowledge of these hidden pathways allowed the Templars to evade pursuers, conceal movements, and maintain operational security. Their maritime intelligence was, in many ways, as sophisticated as any of their military campaigns on land. The operations of the Templar Navy were both routine and extraordinary. In times of peace, ships carried goods, pilgrims, and supplies between commanderies, maintaining the order's wealth and influence. In times of crisis, these same ships became instruments of survival and defiance. The fleet could transport knights to reinforce distant strongholds, evacuate endangered personnel, or secure critical assets before they fell into hostile hands. In essence, the fleet was a mobile extension of the order itself, embodying its discipline, foresight, and adaptability. The disappearance of the fleet in 1307 demonstrates the culmination of these capabilities. While knights on land were being arrested, tortured, or executed, the ships of La Rochelle slipped quietly into the Atlantic, fully provisioned, manned by loyal crews, and carrying the most precious cargo of all, the continuity of the order. This operation required precise coordination, detailed planning, and absolute trust among those involved. Any misstep, an errant signal, a delay in loading, a storm at the wrong moment, could have doomed the entire operation. Yet the Templars executed it flawlessly, leaving behind empty docks and unanswered questions that would perplex authorities for centuries. This fleet was not merely a means of escape, it was a statement of agency. In a world where kings could arrest knights and burn fortresses, the sea represented freedom, mobility, and strategic advantage. The Templars' mastery of maritime operations allowed them to control the narrative, to protect what was valuable, and to maintain influence even when faced with overwhelming persecution. In the empty harbor at La Rochelle, the absence of ships was itself a powerful signal. The Templars were gone, but they were not defeated. The human element of the fleet's operations is as striking as the strategy itself. Imagine the crews, prepared for weeks or months of uncertain travel. They would have faced storms that could overturn ships, encounters with hostile fleets, and the constant stress of navigating unfamiliar waters. Every decision, from when to set sail to how to ration provisions, carried enormous consequences. Yet these men acted with the same discipline and cohesion that had defined the Templars for generations. Their courage was quiet but absolute, a willingness to face uncertainty and danger in service of a larger purpose. The fleet's disappearance also raises questions about the secrets it carried. Beyond gold and silver, there may have been documents, relics, or maps too dangerous to remain in France. Some historians speculate that the Templars had knowledge of distant lands or hidden resources, information that would have threatened kings, popes, or rival orders if it fell into the wrong hands. The fleet, in this sense, was not only transporting wealth but safeguarding knowledge, preserving it for the continuation of the order's influence in ways that could not be traced or controlled. The very existence of this fleet demonstrates the Templars' capacity for long-term strategic thinking. Unlike armies that rely on immediate conquest, the Templar navy embodied patience, foresight, and operational security. They could plan years in advance, positioning ships, crews, and resources to respond to contingencies that might arise decades later. This capacity for anticipatory action, combined with unwavering discipline, made them uniquely capable of surviving events that destroyed lesser organizations. Their maritime operations also reinforced the Templars' mystique. Outsiders rarely understood the full scope of the fleet's capabilities. Ports and harbors would see the ships arrive or depart, but the purpose, cargo, and destination were often invisible. This secrecy fed speculation, rumors, and fear. The Templars' presence at sea became a symbol of power that could not be fully measured or controlled. Even kings, who relied on intelligence and spies, were often left grasping at shadows, unable to predict the movements of a fleet that operated with precision, discipline, and secrecy beyond ordinary comprehension. The coordination required for such fleet operations was immense. Supplies had to be loaded discreetly, crews mustered without alerting local authorities, and routes plotted to minimize encounters with hostile forces. Timing was critical. A single night of delay could expose the fleet to discovery, while a sudden storm could scatter ships and endanger lives. Every action demanded discipline, foresight, and trust. The Templars' ability to execute these operations successfully underscores not only their organizational skill, but also their understanding of human psychology, logistics, and risk management. The fleet also functioned as a mobile network of influence. While moving through European waters, ships could deliver messages, transport emissaries, or establish new alliances. Ports became nodes in a broader system, enabling the order to extend its reach beyond the limitations of land-based operations. This adaptability meant that even when facing existential threats, the Templars could maintain continuity, influence, and operational flexibility, leveraging the sea as both shield and sword. Ultimately, the Templar navy represents the convergence of human ingenuity, strategic foresight, and disciplined execution. It was not simply a collection of ships, but a manifestation of the order's values and capabilities. Secrecy, loyalty, skill, and adaptability. The fleet's role in the events of 1307 demonstrates how these qualities allowed the Templars to survive when all seemed lost, to preserve assets and knowledge that might otherwise have been destroyed, and to leave behind a legacy that continues to inspire speculation and fascination. The mystery of the vanished fleet is inseparable from the Order's mastery of maritime operations. Without their ships, their foresight, and their discipline at sea, the Templars would have been vulnerable, exposed, and ultimately erased. Instead, they leveraged mobility, secrecy, and strategic planning to escape, leaving behind a story that transcends history and enters the realm of legend. The fleet was not just a means of travel. It was a declaration of resilience, a safeguard for knowledge and treasure, and a symbol of the enduring capabilities of an order that had learned to bend the sea itself to its purpose. In the quiet mist of La Rochelle, when the first rays of dawn revealed empty docks, the truth was clear to anyone who could read it. The Templars were gone, but they were not defeated. Their fleet had carried them beyond the reach of kings, beyond the grasp of inquisitors, and into a future that remained uncertain, yet profoundly under their control. It was a testament to foresight, courage, and human ingenuity, a demonstration of the Order's capacity to survive, adapt, and endure against forces that would have destroyed lesser organizations. The vanished fleet, in its mystery and precision, remains one of history's most compelling enigmas. It embodies the Templars' unique combination of discipline, strategy, and secrecy, and it illustrates the extraordinary lengths to which they would go to preserve their order. Ships, men, treasure, and knowledge, all moved with purpose, coordinated with precision, and executed with courage. The fleet was more than a vehicle. It was a symbol of everything the Templars had become, a moving testament to an order that refused to vanish entirely, even when the world tried to erase it. The morning after the arrests of the Templar Knights across France, La Rochelle was eerily silent. Where once the harbor had been alive with activity, lanterns flickering against the stone docks and men moving with purpose, now there was only the whisper of waves against the hulls of empty ships. The fleet that had been so carefully maintained, provisioned, and prepared was gone, leaving behind an absence that spoke volumes. To the men of King Philip, this must have been incomprehensible. How could an entire naval force, laden with treasure, documents, and perhaps even sacred relics, vanish without a trace? It was a disappearance that defied logic, and it would haunt historians, chroniclers, and conspirators for centuries. The fleet's disappearance was not the result of chance. Ships cannot simply drift into legend without careful planning. Every element, the timing of departure, the routes chosen, the crews assigned, had been orchestrated with precision. The Templars had prepared for this moment for years, perhaps decades, anticipating a crisis in which their land-based power might be destroyed. They had built redundancy into their plans. Multiple safe harbors, hidden compartments for treasure and documents, and crews trained to act without hesitation. The Order's discipline, honed in the deserts of the Holy Land and fortified in the castles of Europe, allowed them to execute this plan flawlessly. The potential escape routes for the fleet were as varied as they were daring. Some ships likely hugged the French coast, slipping past patrols under cover of darkness and fog. Smaller vessels could have navigated the rivers leading inland, carrying gold, documents, and emissaries to safer territories. Larger ships, capable of withstanding the Atlantic storms, may have ventured toward England, Portugal, or the Iberian coasts, where the Templars had allies and where royal authority was more fragmented. Each course carried risk. Storms could scatter the fleet, pirates could attack, and coastal fortifications could spot them. Yet the Templars were prepared. They knew the currents, the winds, and the hidden coves where ships could rest unseen. Their knowledge of the sea was as meticulous as their understanding of finance or siege warfare. Some historians suggest that the fleet may have even crossed the Atlantic. The notion is controversial, yet not implausible. The Templars were masters of navigation, capable of reading stars, currents, and weather patterns with precision. They possessed charts of coastlines and harbors that could have guided them to lands unknown to the European powers of the time. If they did sail west, their goal might have been survival, the establishment of a refuge, or the concealment of treasures and knowledge too dangerous to leave behind. Such a journey would have been perilous, but the Templars had faced death in deserts, on battlefields, and during sieges. The Atlantic was simply another challenge to be overcome. The human element of the disappearance cannot be understated. Imagine the men aboard these vessels. Knights, sailors, and perhaps even clerics, all operating under immense pressure. They were leaving behind their homes, commanderies, and comrades, embarking on a journey fraught with uncertainty. The sea is a harsh teacher, indifferent to human plans, yet these men acted with discipline born of years of shared hardship. Every task, from steering the ship to managing provisions, from maintaining secrecy to responding to sudden threats, required absolute focus. There could be no hesitation, no error, for failure would mean not only death but the loss of the Order's treasures, documents, and perhaps its legacy. The cargo aboard these ships was as enigmatic as the fleet itself. Gold and silver, undoubtedly, enough to fund operations or secure influence in distant lands. But beyond the tangible wealth, there were likely documents, maps, and knowledge of immeasurable value. Contracts, treaties, records of loans, and perhaps even secrets regarding distant lands or hidden resources could have been stowed in hidden compartments. Relics, sacred objects with spiritual and political significance, may also have been aboard. The loss of these items to royal forces could have destroyed not just the order's wealth but its influence and reputation. The fleet was therefore not merely a means of escape but a preservation of power. The disappearance also raises questions about coordination and timing. Ships had to leave the harbor in sequence, crews had to act without hesitation, and signals had to be discreet yet effective. A single misstep, a delayed departure, an unguarded conversation, a misread signal, could have alerted the king's agents and doomed the operation. That the fleet vanished without detection speaks to extraordinary planning and trust. Loyalty among the crews and knights was absolute. Each man understood the stakes, and each acted not for personal gain but for the survival of the order and the preservation of its secrets. Rumors and speculation about the fleet's fate began almost immediately. Some chroniclers claimed the ships had sailed to Portugal, where the order's members later resurfaced under the guise of the Order of Christ. Others suggested England as a destination, where sympathetic nobles might provide shelter and resources. More fantastical theories spoke of the fleet venturing even further, across the Atlantic, perhaps to unknown continents where the Templars could establish a refuge beyond the reach of kings and popes. These theories may never be proven, but they highlight the enduring fascination with the fleet's disappearance and the remarkable foresight of those who orchestrated it. The psychological impact of the fleet's vanishing was profound. King Philip's agents, who had hoped to deliver a decisive blow to the order, were left confounded. They had expected to seize ships, treasure, and men, yet the harbor offered nothing but empty docks and silent quays. The absence itself was a statement, a testament to the Templars' capacity for foresight and discipline. It demonstrated that even in the face of overwhelming persecution, the order could act decisively, maintain control, and preserve its most valuable assets. The fleet's disappearance also underscores the Templars' understanding of perception. To the world, it appeared that the order was being destroyed. Fortresses burned, knights arrested, treasures seized. Yet the fleet's absence introduced uncertainty. Were the Templars truly gone? Had some survived to regroup elsewhere? The uncertainty worked to their advantage, allowing them to preserve influence even as their enemies celebrated apparent victories. The psychological effect of vanishing is as potent as any military engagement, and the Templars understood this instinctively. The role of the sea in this disappearance cannot be overstated. On land, the order was vulnerable. Castles could be besieged, knights captured, treasures seized. At sea, they operated in a domain that kings could not fully control. Waves, tides, and fog became allies. The vastness of the ocean concealed movement, disrupted pursuit, and created opportunities for escape. The Templars had learned over decades to read the sea as an extension of strategy, a living landscape where knowledge, skill, and timing could triumph over brute force. The human courage required for such an operation is staggering. Men aboard these ships faced uncertainty, isolation, and constant danger. Every storm threatened disaster, every encounter with hostile forces could be fatal, and yet they sailed with discipline and purpose. They understood that the survival of the order depended on their success, that the continuation of influence, knowledge, and treasure required courage beyond fear. The disappearance was therefore as much a human triumph as a strategic one, a testament to the Templars' ability to operate under pressure and act decisively when the stakes were existential. The vanishing fleet has inspired legends for centuries. Tales of Templars in distant lands, of hidden treasures buried on remote coasts, and of knowledge preserved from destruction are woven into history and myth alike. Some claim that the fleet carried the order's most sacred secrets across the Atlantic, establishing refuges that would allow Templar traditions to survive in secrecy. Others argue the fleet returned to Europe, distributing treasure and influence to loyal allies, ensuring that the order's power could endure even after its apparent destruction. The truth may never be known, but the very speculation underscores the magnitude of the fleet's disappearance and the genius of its planners. The fleet also highlights the Templars' capacity for long-term planning. Unlike armies or kingdoms dependent on immediate victories, the Order thought in decades, anticipating crises and preparing for contingencies that might arise generations later. Their maritime operations were an extension of this foresight. Ships were provisioned for extended voyages, routes were charted with precision, and crews were trained to respond to emergencies. The disappearance of 1307 was not a last-minute escape, but the execution of a strategy honed over years, a plan that relied on discipline, secrecy, and trust. Ultimately, the vanished fleet represents the convergence of strategy, courage, and human ingenuity. It was more than a collection of ships. It was a moving testament to the Order's values, capabilities, and resilience. The fleet carried not only gold, treasure, and documents but the essence of the Templars themselves. Their discipline, foresight, and determination to survive. In leaving La Rochelle, they transformed what might have been annihilation into a story of endurance, mystery, and legend that continues to captivate imaginations centuries later. Even today, the idea of the vanished fleet evokes wonder and speculation. Historians debate its routes, treasures, and ultimate fate. Treasure hunters imagine caches hidden on distant shores. Scholars ponder lost knowledge and strategic genius. The fleet's disappearance reminds us that history is not always written in stone or parchment. Sometimes it sails quietly through mist and waves, leaving only questions and the faintest traces of human daring behind. The Templars' ability to orchestrate such a disappearance demonstrates a remarkable combination of foresight, planning, and courage. Their fleet was not simply a tool of survival. It was a symbol of resilience, a vehicle of influence, and a testament to the enduring capabilities of an order that refused to vanish entirely, even when faced with the might of a king. The mystery of La Rochelle remains unsolved, yet it speaks powerfully to the genius of the Templars. An order that could disappear in plain sight, preserving its legacy for generations to come. The men aboard the vanished Templar fleet were not simply soldiers or sailors. They were part of a tightly woven brotherhood, bound by vows, faith, and shared purpose. Each had been forged in the crucible of years spent defending pilgrims, holding castles, and enduring the hardships of war. Their discipline, courage, and resilience were exceptional, but even the most seasoned knights and sailors could not escape the profound uncertainty that awaited them at sea. The moment the fleet departed La Rochelle, they entered a liminal space, caught between survival and annihilation, between the known world and the mysteries that lay beyond the horizon. The atmosphere aboard the ships must have been tense yet focused. Orders were given and followed without question. Every task had meaning, every movement was part of a larger plan. The knights and sailors knew that failure was not an option. Each ship carried treasure, documents, and perhaps relics, all of which represented not only material wealth but the legacy of the order itself. The responsibility of safeguarding these assets added a psychological weight that few outside the order could comprehend. Sleep, when possible, was light and wary, for the dangers were real, both from the unpredictable sea and the threat of interception. Despite the discipline, fear was inevitable. The Atlantic is a vast and indifferent domain, and storms could rise without warning. Waves taller than ships, violent winds, and sudden squalls could easily destroy vessels unprepared or unskilled. Disease and exhaustion were constant companions, as crews were confined to close quarters, sharing limited food and water, exposed to the elements for days or weeks at a time. The men had faced death before, but the uncertainty of the open sea created a different kind of dread, one that tested not only skill but faith, courage, and the bonds of loyalty. Faith, above all, guided the men. They prayed as they sailed, invoking protection, guidance, and the intercession of God. Their devotion was not idle ritual. It was a source of psychological strength. The belief that their mission had divine purpose gave them the courage to face the unknown, to endure hunger, fatigue, and fear. Every prayer, every ritual was a reaffirmation of their commitment to the order and to each other. In many ways, faith was as essential as the sails, the rudders, and the weapons that allowed them to survive. The camaraderie aboard the fleet was also essential. Men who had trained and fought together knew each other intimately, the strengths, weaknesses, and temperaments of their brothers. This knowledge allowed them to coordinate complex operations under pressure. When a sudden storm threatened to capsize a ship, when a pirate vessel approached on the horizon, or when provisions ran dangerously low, these men acted as a single organism. Each knew that hesitation, selfishness, or error could doom not only themselves but the entire order. This level of trust and cohesion is rare, even in elite military units, and it was central to the fleet's ability to execute its unprecedented disappearance. The journey was also a test of ingenuity. Navigating unfamiliar waters required more than brute strength. It demanded adaptability and clever problem-solving. Currents had to be anticipated, hidden reefs avoided, and enemy patrols evaded. The Templars had trained for years in observation, planning, and strategy, and these skills were now applied in a new and unforgiving environment. Ships had to be maintained constantly. Ropes, sails, and hulls required attention under harsh conditions. Crews improvised repairs, rationed supplies, and managed morale in a confined, stressful environment. The mental strain was as intense as the physical labor, yet the order's discipline ensured that each man remained focused on the mission. The treasure aboard the ships added another layer of complexity and pressure. Gold, silver, and valuable artifacts were not merely wealth. They were leverage, insurance, and the means by which the order could survive politically and financially. Some chests likely contained documents detailing loans, alliances, and knowledge that could influence monarchs, merchants, and even the papacy. Each chest was a responsibility, a secret to be guarded with vigilance, and a symbol of the stakes involved. Protecting these assets demanded constant vigilance, careful planning, and unwavering trust in every member of the crew. Human emotions ran deep during the voyage. There was fear, certainly, but also awe at the vastness of the ocean, gratitude for survival, and hope for the future. Some men may have felt guilt, leaving comrades behind who could not escape the king's wrath. Others may have experienced exhilaration, the thrill of executing a plan that defied the expectations of one of Europe's most powerful monarchs. The tension between despair and hope, fear and courage, must have defined every day at sea. These emotional highs and lows were compounded by the knowledge that their actions would determine not just their fates but the survival of the order and the preservation of its treasures. The fleet's disappearance was also a profound act of defiance. The Templars had faced kings, armies, and inquisitors before, but this was different. It was not a battle fought with swords or siege engines. It was a battle of strategy, foresight, and courage. By leaving La Rochelle undetected, the fleet demonstrated the order's ability to evade persecution, preserve its assets, and maintain agency in a world that sought to destroy it. The act itself was a message. The Templars were not powerless, and they would not be erased so easily. The human stories of those aboard the ships are amplified by the unknown. Historians can speculate about the routes taken, the challenges faced, and the outcomes, but the personal experiences of the men, the moments of doubt, the flashes of courage, the whispered prayers in the dead of night, remain hidden. These are the stories that transform the fleet from a historical event into a living narrative of human resilience. Every wave navigated, every storm weathered, and every treasure protected represents the extraordinary capabilities of individuals who operated in complete harmony with a larger purpose. As the fleet moved through the waters, the men likely encountered other vessels, fishermen, merchant ships, perhaps even hostile patrols. Each encounter would have required careful negotiation, deception, or avoidance. The Templars were masters of secrecy, and these skills were as vital at sea as they had been on land. Misidentification or exposure could have led to confrontation, yet the Order's training allowed them to manage these risks. Every successful evasion reinforced the confidence and cohesion of the crew, further solidifying their ability to operate in extreme conditions. Life aboard the fleet was monotonous yet filled with tension. Hours passed in repetitive tasks. Managing sails, monitoring the horizon, maintaining the ship, and ensuring the safety of the cargo. Yet beneath this routine lay constant awareness of danger and uncertainty. Every decision carried consequences. Each storm, each sighting of distant sails, each navigational choice was a potential turning point. The men were trained to respond calmly and decisively, relying on skill, instinct, and shared trust. Their success was a testament to the Order's ability to cultivate discipline and courage under circumstances that would break lesser men. The journey also demanded adaptability. Circumstances could change in an instant. A sudden squall could force a course correction, a hidden reef could threaten the hull, or an unexpected coastal patrol could compel the fleet to hide in a secluded cove. The men were prepared to make rapid decisions, improvising while maintaining overall coordination. This combination of structure and flexibility is rare, yet it was essential to the fleet's survival. It ensured that even in the most unpredictable circumstances, the mission could continue without compromise. The Templars' faith and sense of purpose provided a psychological anchor during these long and uncertain days at sea. They were not sailing for personal gain, comfort, or glory. They were preserving the Order, safeguarding treasures and knowledge, and ensuring that the Templars' legacy would endure despite the efforts of a king determined to destroy them. This moral clarity, reinforced by shared vows and religious devotion, allowed them to confront fear, uncertainty, and exhaustion with a unity and courage that few outside the Order could imagine. In many ways, the fleet was a moving microcosm of the Order itself, disciplined, resilient, adaptive, and secretive. Every man aboard contributed to the whole, and the success of the mission depended on complete trust and coordination. The stakes were existential, yet the men acted with quiet courage, relying on skill, faith, and shared loyalty to navigate a perilous journey into the unknown. The human element, the emotions, decisions, and sacrifices of each individual, is inseparable from the mystery and enduring fascination of the vanished fleet. The psychological tension of navigating an uncertain sea while protecting priceless cargo cannot be overstated. Each decision, when to sail, how to ration supplies, how to avoid detection, required foresight and nerve. The men aboard the fleet were operating under constant pressure, yet they performed with precision and determination. Their ability to endure, to act decisively, and to maintain discipline under extreme circumstances is one of the most remarkable aspects of the Templars' maritime operations. Even centuries later, the human dimension of this journey resonates. We can imagine the fear and exhilaration, the camaraderie and isolation, the flashes of ingenuity and the quiet moments of reflection. Each wave encountered, each storm weathered, each treasure protected represents the courage, discipline, and resilience of a brotherhood committed to a purpose greater than themselves. The vanished fleet is not merely a historical mystery. It is a story of human endurance, skill, and faith in the face of extraordinary odds. Through the men aboard the fleet, we glimpse the true genius of the Templars. Their ability to integrate human capability, strategic foresight, and moral purpose into a single, coordinated effort. The fleet was not simply a means of escape or transportation. It was a living embodiment of the Order's values, a crucible in which discipline, courage, and loyalty were tested and proven. The human stories intertwined with the disappearance elevate it beyond history into legend, demonstrating how skill, faith, and resilience can triumph in even the most uncertain and dangerous circumstances. The vanished Templar fleet, having slipped silently from La Rochelle, entered waters filled with both opportunity and peril. The open Atlantic stretched endlessly before them, a vast expanse where the rules of kingdoms, kings, and armies no longer applied. Each ship, laden with treasure, documents, and men sworn to the Order, became a vessel of possibility, capable of altering the balance of power far beyond the borders of France. The question of their ultimate destination is one that has fascinated historians, adventurers, and dreamers for centuries, because it is a journey that combines courage, strategy, and mystery in ways almost no other historical event can match. One of the most plausible routes for the fleet was along the coast of the Iberian Peninsula. Portugal and Spain were regions of relative Templar influence, where local nobles were sympathetic to the Order's plight, or at least willing to provide refuge for valuable allies. The rugged coastline offered countless hidden inlets and coves where ships could be concealed during the day or in stormy weather. The fleet could have stopped to replenish supplies, repair damaged vessels, or even split into smaller contingents to evade pursuit. Each decision along this route required precision, knowledge of currents and tides, and an intimate understanding of the geography, skills that the Templars had developed over decades of maritime operations. Portugal, in particular, has long been linked to the Templars' survival. Some historians argue that members of the order eventually became the foundation of the Order of Christ, a new organization that absorbed Templar knowledge, wealth, and influence while operating under a different name. This theory is compelling because it explains how the Order's financial and strategic capabilities could have survived the purge in France. The fleet may have delivered treasure, documents, and surviving knights to safe ports along the Portuguese coast, where the Order could regroup and continue operations in secrecy. Such a move would have required careful coordination, trust in local allies, and the ability to navigate treacherous waters without drawing attention from both secular and ecclesiastical authorities. Other scholars suggest that England may have served as a destination. During this period, the English crown had complicated relations with France and might have tolerated, or even welcomed, a Templar fleet seeking refuge. England's western ports provided access to trade routes, political influence, and relative safety. The fleet could have transported wealth and knowledge to loyal allies, ensuring that the Templars' legacy continued even in the face of widespread persecution. The idea of the fleet reaching England aligns with reports of Templar influence appearing in maritime and financial networks across northern Europe, though direct evidence remains elusive. Some of the more speculative theories push the fleet even further. Legends persist that the Templars may have ventured westward, across the Atlantic, perhaps even reaching lands unknown to contemporary Europe. While there is no definitive proof, it is worth noting that the Templars were exceptional navigators. They understood currents, winds, and celestial navigation to a degree that was advanced for their time. They possessed knowledge of coastlines, harbors, and rivers that allowed them to move unseen and avoid detection. Crossing the Atlantic, while perilous, would have been within the realm of possibility for a fleet trained in secrecy, discipline, and survival. Such a voyage could explain persistent rumors of Templar influence in distant lands, legends of hidden treasure, and mysterious settlements that appear in historical records long after 1307. The Caribbean and the Americas have occasionally been linked to these theories, though the evidence is largely circumstantial. Stories of hidden Templar treasures, secret knowledge, and cryptic inscriptions have fueled speculation for centuries. While these tales are often dismissed as fantasy, the very persistence of such legends indicates that the Templars' disappearance captured the imagination of generations. It also underscores the fact that their fleet was not simply a mode of transportation. It was a vehicle for creating possibility, for rewriting the narrative of the Order, and for leaving an enduring mark on history, whether visible or hidden. Regardless of the fleet's ultimate destination, the logistics of such a voyage are staggering. Ships had to navigate long distances without the benefit of modern instruments. Crews faced storms, shifting winds, and the ever-present threat of disease. Provisions had to be rationed carefully, water stored and protected from contamination, and repairs conducted in the cramped confines of the vessel. The Templars' experience, discipline, and training were essential in these circumstances. Every man aboard played a critical role, from the knights guarding treasure to the sailors maintaining the rigging and navigating the open sea. The success of the fleet depended on absolute cohesion and trust, an extraordinary achievement given the scale and stakes of the operation. The political consequences of the fleet's disappearance were immediate and profound. King Philip's plan to eradicate the Order and seize its assets was undermined. The visible portion of the Templars had been captured, but the invisible portion, the fleet and its cargo, remained beyond his reach. This partial success for the Order frustrated the king and fueled conspiracy theories about hidden wealth, surviving knights, and secret operations. Even the papacy, which had authorized the arrests, was left with unanswered questions. The disappearance challenged assumptions about the Order's vulnerability and exposed the limits of royal authority over a network as disciplined, secretive, and resourceful as the Templars. The psychological impact of the fleet's vanishing cannot be overstated. To contemporaries, it was a ghostly event, a demonstration of skill, cunning, and foresight that seemed almost supernatural. Ships that should have been seized simply vanished, leaving authorities scrambling for explanations. This sense of mystery amplified the Templars' aura of power, even in defeat. The fleet became a symbol of defiance, a reminder that even the mightiest king could not entirely eradicate a network that combined secrecy, discipline, and intelligence. The fleet's disappearance also created a vacuum of knowledge. The treasure, documents, and possible relics aboard the ships were removed from the historical record, leaving gaps that have fueled centuries of speculation. Without access to these assets, historians must rely on fragments, mentions in correspondence, rumors, and financial records that hint at movement and survival. Each clue raises more questions than it answers. Where did the ships go? Who commanded them after leaving La Rochelle? How much treasure or knowledge survived? These gaps in the record have created fertile ground for theories that range from plausible to fantastical, yet each underscores the fleet's enduring mystery. The human dimension of the fleet's disappearance is equally compelling. Men faced uncertainty, danger, and isolation as they sailed into uncharted or hostile waters. Every decision carried existential stakes. A misjudged current, a poorly timed storm, or a moment of hesitation could result in disaster. Yet the crews acted with remarkable composure, a reflection of the training, discipline, and shared purpose instilled by the order. Their courage, ingenuity, and cohesion allowed the fleet to vanish successfully, preserving the lives, wealth, and knowledge necessary for the order's survival. As the fleet sailed, it also became a conduit of influence. Ships could deliver messages, transfer wealth, and transport emissaries to sympathetic regions. The Templars were not merely fleeing. They were maintaining continuity, ensuring that their networks, both financial and political, remained intact. Ports along the Iberian coast, England, and possibly further afield became nodes in a hidden network, allowing the order to continue operating in secrecy. The fleet's movement, therefore, was not only an act of survival but also a calculated projection of power, influence, and continuity in a world that assumed the Templars had been eradicated. The vanishing fleet also reinforced the Templars' mystique. To the outside world, the order was destroyed. Their fortresses were in ruins, their knights imprisoned or executed. Yet the fleet's disappearance suggested otherwise. The Templars had preserved agency, knowledge, and treasure in a way that kings and inquisitors could not anticipate. This ambiguity has inspired speculation, legend, and fascination for centuries. The fleet became a symbol of the order's cunning and endurance, a reminder that even when history appears to conclude, the story may continue in hidden and unexpected ways. Ultimately, the vanished fleet illustrates the Templars' extraordinary capacity for foresight and strategy. It was a carefully orchestrated operation, combining navigation, discipline, loyalty, and secrecy to achieve what seemed impossible: the preservation of the order in the face of near-total annihilation. Whether the fleet reached Portugal, England, the Atlantic, or lands entirely unknown, it represents a convergence of human skill, courage, and strategic vision. Its disappearance is both a historical mystery and a testament to the Templars' enduring genius. The fleet's vanishing continues to challenge historians and capture imaginations because it embodies the intersection of human determination, skill, and uncertainty. Each possibility, Portugal, England, the Atlantic, or beyond, reveals not only the strategic capabilities of the order but also the profound courage and resilience of those aboard. They navigated a dangerous world with foresight, discipline, and trust, preserving wealth, knowledge, and hope when the forces arrayed against them sought to destroy all they had built. Even today, the vanished fleet evokes awe and speculation. It is a story of strategy, courage, and human ingenuity, a narrative in which every wave, wind, and hidden cove contributed to the survival of one of history's most extraordinary orders. The fleet was not simply a means of transport. It was a living testament to the Templars' capacity to plan, adapt, and endure. Its disappearance reshaped the narrative of the order, leaving behind questions, legends, and a fascination that endures more than 7 centuries later. The vanished Templar fleet had carried more than just men. It had borne the lifeblood of the order, the tangible and intangible assets that defined its power and influence. Gold and silver, enough to fund armies or sway kings, were carefully stowed in chests lined with hidden compartments. Yet the treasures were not only monetary. They were symbolic repositories of trust, faith, and survival. Each coin, each jewel, each carefully packed relic represented the Templars' foresight, a hedge against the destruction that awaited them on land. The Order understood that wealth was not merely a tool of luxury or power. It was a shield, a bargaining chip, and, perhaps most importantly, a way to preserve its identity in the face of annihilation. The documents carried aboard the fleet were equally vital. Meticulously maintained records of loans, investments, and alliances formed over decades were likely included, as well as maps and correspondence detailing trade routes, safe harbors, and political networks. These were not ordinary papers. They were the keys to influence. They allowed the Templars to operate as financiers, diplomats, and strategists, extending their reach far beyond the confines of any castle or port. Losing them to the French crown would have meant more than financial ruin. It would have meant the obliteration of the Order's ability to interact with the wider world, to plan, and to survive. The fleet's success in disappearing with these documents ensured the continuation of both tangible and intangible power. The question of where the treasure and documents went has fueled centuries of speculation. Some scholars argue that parts of the cargo were taken to Portugal, where the Order had established a strong presence, particularly in regions sympathetic to their plight. There, hidden caches could have been secured in monasteries, fortified castles, or even remote coastal coves. The foundation of the Order of Christ in Portugal provides circumstantial evidence that at least some of the Templar wealth and knowledge was absorbed and preserved under a new identity. This strategic redirection demonstrates a level of foresight that borders on genius, ensuring that the Order's influence would survive even when its visible presence was erased. Other theories suggest that England may have played a role. With its complicated political relationship with France, England may have offered safe harbor, either tacitly or overtly, for portions of the fleet and its cargo. Nobles sympathetic to the Order could have facilitated the storage of treasure, documents, and even men, allowing the Templars to maintain networks that spanned borders and oceans. Such a scenario implies a level of international coordination and secrecy that was extraordinary for the medieval world, highlighting the Templars' capacity for strategic planning and their ability to manipulate the perceptions of kings and popes alike. The treasures themselves may have included sacred relics, objects imbued with spiritual and political significance. Relics such as fragments of the true cross, vials of holy oil, or other items of religious veneration were not only symbols of faith but instruments of influence. To control such relics was to wield moral authority, and their preservation was a priority for the Order. If these items were indeed aboard the fleet, their disappearance would have protected both the spiritual and political capital of the Templars, keeping their influence alive even as their terrestrial commanderies fell. The logistics of managing these assets at sea were staggering. Ships had to be loaded carefully to distribute weight evenly, chests had to be secured to prevent theft or loss in rough waters, and compartments had to be concealed from prying eyes. The crews, trained for vigilance, maintained strict oversight of the cargo, monitoring access and ensuring that secrecy was absolute. Every movement, every decision carried consequences for the survival of the Order. A single misstep, an exposed chest, an unguarded map, or a moment of carelessness could have undone decades of planning and risked the annihilation of both treasure and influence. The fleet's movement also functioned as a form of financial strategy. By distributing treasure, the Templars were not only preserving wealth, but also ensuring the flexibility to operate in multiple regions simultaneously. Caches in Portugal, England, and possibly other European ports would allow the Order to maintain influence even in the absence of centralized command. This strategy transformed physical wealth into a network of operational power, allowing knights to leverage resources strategically, fund new ventures, or exert influence over local rulers and merchants. The treasure was not inert. It was a living instrument of survival and strategy. Beyond the material, the documents may have contained knowledge that was even more valuable. Maps of trade routes, intelligence on political alliances, and records of financial dealings could have been used to influence the course of European politics long after the Purge. Some speculate that the Templars possessed knowledge of distant lands, mineral resources, or maritime routes unknown to other European powers. If so, the fleet's cargo was not merely treasure. It was a repository of human ingenuity, strategic insight, and secret information that, in the right hands, could reshape kingdoms. Preserving these documents was as much an act of strategic foresight as safeguarding gold. The human effort required to protect these assets was immense. Knights and sailors alike understood that the survival of the order depended on their vigilance. Every shift, every watch, every night spent navigating unknown waters contributed to the safeguarding of treasure, documents, and secrets. The psychological burden of this responsibility was enormous. Men faced isolation, storms, fatigue, and the constant threat of interception. Yet they performed with unwavering discipline. Their courage was not just physical. It was moral and intellectual, a testament to the Templars' training, faith, and shared sense of purpose. The disappearance of the fleet and its cargo also had profound implications for history. The inability of royal authorities to capture the treasure or documents fueled rumors and speculation that endure to this day. These rumors, in turn, contributed to the Templars' mystique, a perception that they were more than knights, more than financiers, more than a medieval order. They were keepers of secrets, masters of strategy, and agents of a hidden world operating beneath the surface of history. The vanished treasure became a symbol of the order's endurance, reinforcing the notion that even in apparent defeat, the Templars retained agency, influence, and possibility. Some historians argue that portions of the treasure and documents may have been deliberately split among the fleet, a tactic designed to reduce risk. By dispersing assets across multiple ships, the Templars ensured that even if one vessel were lost to storm, piracy, or interception, the majority of their wealth and knowledge would survive. This strategy reflects a sophisticated understanding of risk management, one that was far ahead of its time. It also demonstrates the order's capacity to think in probabilistic terms, balancing potential loss against the preservation of critical resources. The Templars' ability to safeguard their assets during the fleet's voyage also depended on secrecy and subterfuge. Ships were likely disguised, false manifests may have been used, and routes chosen to avoid detection by hostile authorities. Every port visit required careful negotiation and discretion. Even in regions nominally friendly to the order, the presence of valuable cargo attracted attention, necessitating vigilance and diplomacy. The Templars' mastery of secrecy ensured that their wealth and knowledge were protected, even as the wider world assumed the order had been extinguished. The psychological and symbolic significance of the vanished treasure cannot be overstated. Its disappearance challenged assumptions about power, authority, and control. Kings and popes may have believed they had destroyed the order, yet the fleet demonstrated that material and intellectual power could endure beyond the reach of persecution. This dual preservation of wealth and knowledge allowed the Templars to influence events long after the Purge, either directly through hidden allies or indirectly through the aura of mystery that surrounded them. The fleet's successful safeguarding of treasure and documents also underscores the Templars' organizational genius. They were able to integrate logistics, navigation, human psychology, and strategic foresight into a single operation that had existential stakes. Every decision, from the allocation of chests to the selection of routes, reflected a combination of skill, discipline, and long-term thinking. The disappearance of the fleet demonstrates that the Templars were not merely warriors or financiers. They were planners, logisticians, and strategists operating at a level of sophistication rarely matched in history. The legacy of these assets, preserved through the fleet's disappearance, is reflected in both historical influence and legend. Portions of the treasure may have been absorbed by successor organizations, funding operations, constructions, and charitable works while maintaining the Templars' ethos in secret. Documents and knowledge may have shaped financial and political systems, transmitted through allies or descendants who understood their value. The persistence of legends about hidden Templar wealth and secrets is itself evidence of the enduring impact of what the fleet carried, a shadow of influence that has echoed across centuries. Even today, the story of the Templar treasure and documents challenges our understanding of history. It forces us to consider how much of the past is shaped by invisible hands, by secrets moved in silence, and by decisions made in fear, hope, and extraordinary courage. The vanished fleet, in safeguarding these assets, ensured that the Order's story would not end with its apparent destruction. Instead, it continued in hidden networks, secret archives, and legends that persist to this day. A reminder that power and knowledge are not always visible, and that survival often depends on discretion, foresight, and human ingenuity. The safeguarding of treasure and secrets aboard the vanished fleet is more than a historical curiosity. It is a testament to human courage, discipline, and strategic foresight. It reflects an understanding of risk, opportunity, and influence that allowed the Templars to survive in a world that had turned violently against them. Every chest, document, and relic preserved was a triumph of planning and human resolve, a silent victory that ensured the Order's legacy endured long after the fires of persecution had burned its commanderies to the ground. Ultimately, the fleet's disappearance, and the treasure it carried, symbolizes the enduring genius of the Templars. They transformed wealth into survival, knowledge into power, and secrecy into endurance. By preserving these assets, the Order maintained a presence in history that was both tangible and symbolic, shaping narratives, inspiring legends, and leaving a mystery that continues to captivate imaginations centuries later. The vanished fleet was not merely a means of escape. It was a living embodiment of strategy, faith, and resilience, and it ensured that the Templars' story would continue long after the world thought they were gone. After the fleet vanished from La Rochelle, the Templars' survival depended not only on the ships themselves but on a web of secret networks and alliances carefully cultivated across Europe. These networks were invisible to the casual observer yet sophisticated beyond almost any contemporary organization. Noble allies, sympathetic clergy, merchants, and even rogue political figures formed a lattice of trust and resources that allowed the Order to operate in secrecy, transport treasure, and protect its members. Every harbor, monastery, and castle potentially held a Templar contact, ready to provide shelter, provisions, or intelligence. The effectiveness of these networks demonstrates the Order's understanding of human relationships as strategic assets, a principle as critical to survival as any sword or ship. Portugal was perhaps the most notable center of such clandestine support. Local monarchs and nobles recognized the value of the Templars' experience, wealth, and networks. When the fleet arrived, or perhaps portions of it, the Order was able to leverage pre-existing alliances to secure safe harbors, conceal treasure, and reorganize under the guise of the Order of Christ. This transformation was not merely symbolic. It preserved the operational capacity of the Templars, allowing them to continue influencing trade, finance, and politics in the Iberian Peninsula. The shift into Portugal illustrates the Order's ability to adapt to political realities without sacrificing its essence or resources. Other regions of Europe, including England, parts of Spain, and even more remote coastal areas, may have offered similar refuge. England, embroiled in intermittent conflict with France, provided opportunities for the fleet to anchor under less scrutiny. Ports along the Channel or western coasts could be reached discreetly, particularly by smaller ships that were less conspicuous than larger vessels. In these locations, the Templars may have dispersed treasure, recruited new allies, or maintained communication with remaining members of the Order. The success of such operations would have depended on strict secrecy, trust among local contacts, and careful management of timing and visibility. The Templars' networks were not merely physical but also informational. Merchants, sailors, and clerics often doubled as intelligence agents, transmitting information about political developments, troop movements, and threats to the Order. These informants could operate across borders, providing warnings about royal inspections, hostile forces, or other dangers. This intelligence allowed the Templars to act preemptively, safeguarding treasures, relocating personnel, and adjusting maritime routes. In many ways, the Order functioned like a decentralized intelligence network, combining the disciplines of navigation, finance, and espionage into a single operational framework. Communication within the network required ingenuity. Messages needed to travel quickly and securely, often through seemingly innocuous channels. Merchants' letters, religious dispatches, or coded correspondence could carry instructions and updates to scattered allies. Cryptic symbols, ciphers, and physical markers may have been used to signal the presence of safe havens or indicate the status of assets. Such methods reflect an advanced understanding of operational security, demonstrating that the Templars anticipated surveillance, interception, and betrayal. Their ability to maintain communication under such conditions was critical to the survival of both personnel and treasure. The human element of these networks cannot be overstated. Trust was the currency of survival. A single betrayal could have led to the capture of treasure, the exposure of safe havens, or the destruction of personnel. The Templars therefore relied on bonds forged through years of shared experience, mutual loyalty, and rigorous testing of character. Every ally, from a coastal merchant to a noble patron, had to be vetted and trusted implicitly. This network of human relationships functioned as a living organism, with each node critical to the health and security of the whole. Safe havens themselves were varied and adaptable. Remote monasteries offered shelter under the cover of religious neutrality, while fortified castles provided protection against armed pursuit. Coastal caves, hidden inlets, and secluded farms could conceal smaller contingents or portions of the fleet's treasure. Even urban properties owned or controlled by sympathetic nobles or merchants could serve as temporary caches, allowing for the distribution of assets and reducing the risk of total loss. The Templars' ability to select and secure such locations demonstrates not only strategic foresight but also a profound understanding of geography, social networks, and human behavior. The coordination of these safe havens and networks was complex. Decisions had to be made regarding which assets to move, where to place personnel, and how to maintain operational security. Timing was critical. Delays could expose the order to discovery, while hasty moves risked mistakes or losses. The Templars' training, discipline, and experience allowed them to execute these operations with precision. The networks were dynamic, capable of adapting to changing circumstances and threats, reflecting a level of organizational sophistication rarely seen in medieval Europe. The political context of Europe after 1307 added both risk and opportunity for these networks. While the French crown was aggressively pursuing the destruction of the order, other regions had their own priorities, rivalries, and conflicts. Local rulers might have seen the Templars as valuable allies, useful for trade, finance, or military expertise. By leveraging these political complexities, the order could operate in the shadows, using the tensions between powers to its advantage. Safe havens were not merely neutral spaces. They were nodes in a broader strategy of survival and influence. The human courage involved in maintaining these networks was extraordinary. Men and women who provided shelter, transported treasure, or relayed information did so at immense personal risk. Exposure could mean imprisonment, torture, or execution. Yet these individuals acted with discretion and loyalty, contributing to the preservation of the order. Their actions remind us that the Templars' survival was not solely the result of ships or treasure, but of a network of human courage, trust, and intelligence operating quietly across borders. The psychological dimension of the network is equally significant. The Templars had to instill confidence in dispersed allies while maintaining secrecy. Messages were often urgent and ambiguous, requiring recipients to act decisively without revealing information to outsiders. This reliance on human judgment and loyalty created a culture of responsibility, trust, and mutual dependence that reinforced the cohesion of the order, even in the absence of centralized command. The networks were living proofs of the Templars' understanding of human nature as a strategic asset. The survival of treasure and knowledge depended on redundancy within these networks. Multiple safe havens, dispersed caches, and overlapping communication routes ensured that the loss of one node would not compromise the whole system. This approach reflects a sophisticated understanding of risk management and operational continuity. By building redundancy, the Templars could absorb shocks, whether from natural disasters, betrayal, or political upheaval, and continue operations without catastrophic failure. The networks also served as channels for rebuilding the order in the aftermath of the purge. Surviving knights could be relocated, new members recruited, and resources redistributed. Even in exile, the Templars could maintain influence over trade, finance, and religious institutions. The Order's persistence depended on the ability to leverage these networks, to act strategically, and to adapt to changing political landscapes. This capacity for regeneration underscores the extraordinary foresight and organizational skill of the Templars. Beyond the practical, the networks contributed to the enduring mystique of the Order. Rumors of hidden treasures, secret havens, and surviving knights created an aura of mystery and fear that persisted long after 1307. These legends reinforced the perception that the Templars were not merely a medieval order but a hidden power operating beyond the reach of kings and popes. The networks themselves, invisible to most, became a symbol of the Order's enduring ingenuity, secrecy, and resilience. The role of the sea in these networks was also critical. Coastal ports, hidden inlets, and navigable rivers allowed for movement of personnel, treasure, and information with a degree of stealth impossible on land. Ships could connect distant nodes of the network, carrying gold, documents, and emissaries while avoiding detection. Maritime knowledge, learned over decades, became a strategic tool that allowed the Templars to maintain influence even when their visible presence was under siege. The human stories within these networks reveal a remarkable combination of courage, intelligence, and adaptability. Men and women risked their lives to shelter the Order's secrets, transport treasure, and relay information. Knights aboard the fleet relied on intelligence provided by allies on land to navigate safely, avoid interception, and distribute assets. Each successful movement strengthened the network, ensuring continuity and preserving the Templars' influence even in exile. The survival of the Order depended as much on these human connections as on the ship's treasure or strategy. Ultimately, the secret networks and safe havens illustrate the Templars' extraordinary organizational skill and strategic foresight. They were able to integrate human loyalty, geographical knowledge, political awareness, and operational discipline into a cohesive system capable of surviving one of the most aggressive purges in European history. The fleets, the treasure, and the documents were critical, but it was the network, the invisible web of trust, courage, and intelligence, that ensured the Order's survival. Even centuries later, these networks remain a source of fascination and speculation. Historians attempt to trace safe havens, alliances, and hidden caches, while treasure hunters and enthusiasts imagine secret routes and concealed wealth. The persistence of these mysteries reflects the genius of the Templars, an organization capable of disappearing under pressure, preserving resources, and maintaining influence through a combination of secrecy, discipline, and human ingenuity. The vanished fleet and its networks are a testament to the extraordinary capabilities of an order that refused to vanish entirely, even when confronted with near-total annihilation. The legacy of these networks is not only historical but psychological and symbolic. They demonstrate that influence, power, and survival do not depend solely on visibility or force. The Templars' ability to operate in secrecy, to leverage human loyalty, and to create resilient systems of protection ensured that their story would continue long after the visible order had been destroyed. These networks transformed the fleet's disappearance from a simple escape into an enduring strategy of survival, continuity, and influence, leaving a legacy that continues to intrigue and inspire curiosity centuries later. Even after the fleet vanished, rumors about the Templars persisted like whispers carried on the wind, spreading across towns, ports, and courts with an uncanny persistence. Some spoke of knights seen in distant lands, cloaked in secrecy, their armor and habits betraying a familiarity that suggested training far beyond that of ordinary soldiers. Others claimed to glimpse vessels moving under moonlight, ships that appeared and disappeared as if guided by invisible hands. These accounts were often dismissed as superstition, yet their consistency across decades and continents hints at a hidden network still operating long after the King's Purge. Every rumor, every whispered tale, contributed to the growing mythos of the Templars as a force that could not be fully destroyed, a presence that lingered in shadowy corners of Europe and possibly beyond. In coastal towns, particularly along the Atlantic and Mediterranean, locals reported strange arrivals and departures, sometimes under cover of darkness. Merchants and fishermen spoke of ships that carried unusual cargoes, often protected by men who did not speak or answer questions lightly. These were not ordinary smuggling vessels. Their movements were precise, disciplined, and purposeful. In some instances, the ships were described as larger than typical merchantmen, with compartments built for secrecy, capable of hiding both treasure and men. While few of these tales could be verified, the patterns suggest that portions of the fleet may have remained active, distributing resources and maintaining lines of communication between safe havens. The rumors often extended inland, where travelers and local peasants whispered of strangers with the bearing of knights, who appeared suddenly in villages, performed charitable acts, or disappeared as mysteriously as they arrived. Some of these figures were believed to be emissaries of the Templars, carrying messages or distributing resources to allies while avoiding the gaze of authorities. In regions like Portugal, Spain, and even parts of Italy, stories persisted of cloaked men entering churches or monasteries to deposit documents or treasures, only to vanish into forests or mountains. These accounts suggest a deliberate and disciplined effort to maintain influence and protect the order's assets while remaining entirely invisible to the secular and ecclesiastical powers hunting them. Legends of hidden knowledge intensified these rumors. Some spoke of secret maps, detailing territories unknown to most Europeans, perhaps even pointing toward new continents or trade routes yet to be explored. Others suggested that the order possessed arcane knowledge, accumulated over centuries in the Holy Land, that could influence kings, armies, or financial networks. The mystery of what precisely was carried aboard the fleet fueled speculation and fear alike, giving rise to stories of libraries hidden in monasteries, encrypted documents, and sacred relics preserved for generations. The possibility that the Templars had secret knowledge that transcended ordinary political and military power made them an enduring source of fascination and suspicion. In France, where the purge had been most brutal, tales of surviving Templars circulated in hushed tones. Families who had once interacted with the order whispered of knights escaping in the dead of night, taking treasure and sacred objects with them. Some claimed that the fleet's treasure was dispersed across hidden caches throughout Europe, never to be recovered, while the men themselves may have blended into society under new identities. These stories, while impossible to verify, reflect the psychological impact of the fleet's disappearance. Even in the heart of persecution, the Templars' influence persisted, leaving a mark on the imagination of contemporaries that has lasted to this day. The idea of hidden knowledge and relics fueled secretive expeditions and searches in later centuries. Treasure hunters and scholars alike scoured monasteries, castles, and remote locations for signs of Templar wealth or documents. Many of these searches were inspired by historical records that hinted at wealth being moved or hidden prior to the arrests in 1307. The combination of tantalizing clues, scattered across geography and time, gave rise to legends that the Templars had not only survived but also possessed knowledge that could reshape power structures, trade, and even religious authority. The fleet, in essence, became a vessel not just of treasure but of enduring mystery, linking the historical with the mythic. Reports of secret gatherings of surviving Templars added another layer to these stories. Some claimed that knights convened in hidden chambers or remote castles, preserving rituals, training new members, and planning future operations. These clandestine meetings would have required meticulous planning, coordination across borders, and a network of trusted allies capable of ensuring secrecy. If these gatherings occurred, they would suggest that the Templars did not merely survive in isolated pockets but maintained cohesion and purpose, continuing the order's traditions while remaining invisible to a world that believed them destroyed. The spread of these rumors was not merely idle gossip. They had practical consequences, influencing political decisions, local alliances, and perceptions of power. Monarchs and local authorities, uncertain about the extent of surviving Templar influence, sometimes acted with caution or suspicion toward merchants, nobles, or religious institutions thought to be connected to the order. The aura of mystery surrounding the fleet and its alleged activities created a psychological advantage for the Templars. Even in absence, they exerted influence by shaping perception, fear, and curiosity in ways that extended their reach far beyond what simple military or financial power could achieve. Maritime sightings were particularly compelling. Accounts described fleets appearing suddenly off coastlines, only to vanish before inspection. Some tales suggested that these ships were capable of extraordinary maneuvers, slipping past patrols and disappearing into fog or darkness. While much of this may be embellishment, the consistency of reports across decades suggests that at least some vessels associated with the Templars may have remained operational. The combination of skilled navigation, stealth, and secrecy could have allowed the Order to continue transporting treasure, messages, and personnel across vast distances, sustaining their networks and influence in secret. The human stories behind these rumors are rich with intrigue. Individuals who witnessed or interacted with these mysterious figures often described a mix of fear and reverence. Knights and emissaries carried themselves with authority, displaying skills and knowledge that were unmistakably honed through disciplined training. Whether guarding treasure, conveying messages, or advising sympathetic nobles, these men acted with precision and purpose. Their presence in distant lands reinforced the notion that the Order's disappearance was not absolute, that even after persecution, its agents remained capable of influencing events and protecting what was left of the Templar legacy. Religious institutions also played a role in sustaining these secretive activities. Monasteries and churches, often deeply embedded in local communities, could provide shelter, storage, and cover for Templar operations. Relics, documents, and treasure could be concealed beneath altars, behind walls, or within remote annexes, accessible only to those who knew the correct sequence of signals or passwords. The cooperation of clergy, whether out of loyalty, fear, or shared faith, added another layer of protection and secrecy. These institutions became nodes in a hidden network that allowed the Order to continue operating under the radar of both secular and ecclesiastical authorities. The persistence of legends about the Templars also reflects the enduring psychological impact of the fleet's disappearance. Tales of hidden treasure, secret knowledge, and surviving knights created a sense of uncertainty and awe. People could not be sure whether the stories were true, and that uncertainty amplified the Order's mystique. Even when concrete evidence was lacking, the belief in the Templars' continued presence influenced behavior, inspired myths, and fueled speculation for generations. The fleet, therefore, had achieved something extraordinary. It had transformed absence into influence and disappearance into legend. Some accounts even suggest that the Templars may have influenced exploration and trade in subtle ways. Knowledge of safe maritime routes, distant ports, and political conditions in foreign lands could have been transmitted through surviving agents, shaping the decisions of merchants and rulers alike. If true, this influence would mean that the Order's disappearance did not mark the end of its impact, but rather the beginning of a quieter, more covert form of power, operating behind the scenes of emerging European economies and geopolitical strategies. The interplay between secrecy, rumor, and legend created a feedback loop. Stories of surviving Templars inspired searches and speculation, which in turn reinforced the perception of the Order's continued existence. This cycle ensured that the Templars' influence extended far beyond the tangible assets carried by the fleet. The very act of vanishing, combined with the careful preservation of treasure, knowledge, and personnel, created a phenomenon in which history and myth became intertwined, leaving a legacy that has persisted for centuries. Ultimately, the mysterious sightings, hidden knowledge, and secretive movements attributed to the Templars illustrate the profound combination of strategy, courage, and psychological insight that defined the Order. The fleet was not simply a means of escape. It was a tool of enduring influence, capable of sustaining networks, preserving treasure, and inspiring legends. The rumors and sightings that followed its disappearance are evidence of the Order's extraordinary ability to manipulate perception, maintain operational secrecy, and exert influence even when it appeared to have been destroyed. The vanished fleet and the shadowy activities that followed underscore a central truth. The Templars were masters not only of combat and finance but also of human perception, secrecy, and influence. Their ability to survive, operate, and inspire awe in the wake of persecution demonstrates a level of strategic sophistication rarely matched in history. Each whispered rumor, each reported sighting, and each tale of hidden knowledge serves as a testament to the enduring ingenuity of an Order that refused to be erased entirely, leaving a legacy that continues to captivate imaginations and inspire questions centuries later. The human and historical significance of these rumors cannot be underestimated. They represent the invisible threads through which the Templars continued to shape events, influence allies, and protect assets long after the fires of persecution had destroyed their visible holdings. By preserving secrecy, leveraging networks, and cultivating an aura of mystery, the Order transformed disappearance into enduring influence, demonstrating that survival is as much about perception, strategy, and trust as it is about force or wealth. Even today, the legends of hidden Templar knowledge, treasure, and surviving knights speak to the enduring power of strategy, secrecy, and human courage. They remind us that history is not always recorded in stone or parchment. Sometimes it sails silently through the imagination, whispered in coastal towns, hidden in monasteries, and preserved in the actions of those who operate unseen. The vanished fleet became not just a maritime achievement but a symbol of the Templars' capacity to persist, adapt, and leave an indelible mark on history, blending the tangible and the legendary in ways that continue to intrigue, mystify, and inspire. Long after the last ship of the vanished fleet slipped beyond the horizon, the shadow of the Templars lingered, not only in legends and whispered rumors but in the very fabric of European society. Their disappearance did not mark the end of their influence. Instead, it set the stage for centuries of speculation, adaptation, and subtle imprint on the structures and secret networks that would follow. Some of the most intriguing evidence lies in the patterns of influence seen in later secret societies, organizations whose rituals, symbols, and clandestine operations bear striking echoes of the Templars' methods and ideology. While direct continuity is difficult to prove, the Templars' extraordinary ability to preserve knowledge, wealth, and strategic networks in the face of annihilation ensured that their ethos and operational model became a template for generations to come. The connection between the Templars and Freemasonry is perhaps the most widely discussed in this context. While Freemasonry officially emerged centuries later, it shares striking thematic and symbolic elements with the Templars. An emphasis on secrecy, ritual, moral and spiritual development, hierarchical structure, and an enduring commitment to a set of values beyond the immediate scrutiny of secular authorities. Many Masonic texts refer to Templar knights or allude to symbols and practices that mirror what is known of the order. Some historians argue that surviving Templars, having escaped persecution with treasure, documents, and sacred knowledge, contributed to the foundations of early Masonic lodges, transmitting their organizational skills, ethical codes, and mystical symbols into a new framework adapted for a rapidly changing Europe. The cultural and symbolic impact of the vanished fleet is also significant. By disappearing with their treasure and knowledge, the Templars created an enduring aura of invincibility and mystery. Stories of secret fleets, hidden caches, and surviving knights permeated European consciousness, influencing art, literature, and folklore. Paintings, manuscripts, and even architectural designs began to incorporate Templar motifs. Crosses, coded symbols, and cryptic inscriptions that hint at hidden knowledge or moral authority. The narrative of the Templars became a metaphor for perseverance, cunning, and the ability to survive systemic persecution, inspiring generations to imagine hidden truths beneath the surface of history. Some scholars suggest that the Templars' influence extended beyond European borders, subtly shaping the practices of orders and societies in the Mediterranean, North Africa, and even the Near East. Knowledge of navigation, finance, and diplomacy that survived with the fleet may have been absorbed into local networks, carried by displaced knights, sympathetic nobles, or merchants. In this way, the Templars' disappearance was not a mere retreat, but a strategic redistribution of influence, ensuring that the order's expertise persisted in fragmented, but operationally coherent forms across multiple regions. The fleet acted as a carrier of intellectual, financial, and spiritual capital, enabling the order to leave an imprint on areas far beyond their original holdings. The surviving Templars, operating in secrecy, likely continued to observe and influence European power structures. By embedding themselves in new societies or adopting alternative identities, they could preserve knowledge, cultivate alliances, and protect assets while avoiding detection. The interplay between visibility and concealment became a central strategy. While outwardly appearing absorbed into other orders or entirely absent from public life, the order's members maintained a silent hand in economic and political affairs. The vanishing fleet enabled this maneuver, transporting not only treasure but also personnel capable of operating effectively in clandestine capacities across borders. Historical echoes of the Templars' influence can be seen in the organizational sophistication of later societies. Their methods of maintaining secrecy, ensuring loyalty, and coordinating dispersed members appear to have informed the practices of groups engaged in political, commercial, or religious endeavors that required discretion and resilience. While the names and purposes of these groups varied, the underlying principles, discipline, loyalty, and operational security bear resemblance to what is known of the Templars. By studying these later organizations, one can detect the fingerprints of the vanished fleet and the networks it helped sustain, demonstrating that the Templars' legacy extended far beyond the immediate aftermath of 1307. The symbolic power of the vanished fleet also played a psychological role in shaping perceptions of power and authority. The Order's ability to disappear while preserving wealth and knowledge undermined contemporary assumptions about the reach of kings, popes, and armies. If the fleet could vanish, so too could the Templars' influence remain hidden but potent. This created a persistent tension in European consciousness. The idea that power might exist beyond observation, that the visible structures of authority were not the sole repositories of influence. The Templars became archetypes of hidden agency, and their story informed the ways later secretive organizations thought about strategy, identity, and survival. Art, literature, and folklore often captured these ideas in symbolic form. Tales of hidden treasure, secret voyages, and surviving knights circulated in chronicles, poems, and oral histories. These stories did more than entertain. They served as encoded lessons in vigilance, loyalty, and strategy, emphasizing the importance of knowledge, discretion, and perseverance. The vanished fleet became a symbol of what could be achieved through careful planning, courage, and secrecy, reinforcing moral and practical lessons that would resonate for generations. The Templars' disappearance became a narrative of agency preserved through cunning and resilience, rather than brute force alone. The possibility that Templar knowledge influenced exploration is another compelling angle. Navigation, astronomy, and cartographic skills preserved by the Order may have informed later voyages, particularly as European powers began venturing farther into the Atlantic and beyond. Whether through direct mentorship of navigators, the transmission of secret maps, or the protection of geographic knowledge within monasteries and allied networks, the Templars' legacy could have shaped early exploratory efforts. The vanished fleet, by transporting both treasure and knowledge, ensured that the Order's intellectual capital survived, becoming a hidden driver of subsequent European expansion. Religious and philosophical influence is equally significant. The Templars' combination of martial, spiritual, and financial expertise presented a model of disciplined, purpose-driven organization. This model inspired not only secret societies but also reform movements, monastic orders, and intellectual circles that valued structure, secrecy, and strategic thinking. By disappearing with their wealth and knowledge, the Templars ensured that their approach to organizational effectiveness could be studied, adapted, and integrated by those who recognized its power. The vanished fleet, in this sense, acted as a vector for cultural and intellectual transmission, carrying lessons of strategy, governance, and ethical rigor into a world that had thought the Order extinguished. The mystery surrounding the fleet also created an aura of moral and spiritual authority. The knights aboard the ships were not merely soldiers or financiers. They were custodians of knowledge, faith, and a way of life. Their successful disappearance reinforced the idea that moral courage and strategic foresight could triumph over immediate persecution, inspiring later generations to consider the ways in which ethics, faith, and discipline could be leveraged for survival and influence. Legends of the fleet conveyed lessons about perseverance, the protection of sacred values, and the careful deployment of knowledge, ideas that would echo in secret societies and intellectual movements centuries later. The persistence of Templar symbols in secret societies, from ceremonial regalia to coded emblems, suggests deliberate homage to the Order's methods and achievements. These symbols served as both a moral compass and a practical guide, reminding members of the importance of discretion, loyalty, and purpose. By embedding Templar imagery and principles into their structures, Later organizations created a continuity of influence that was invisible to most observers but operationally meaningful to insiders. The vanished fleet, by preserving personnel and knowledge, allowed these symbolic legacies to take root, ensuring that the Order's ethos endured beyond its physical destruction. The human stories behind these adaptations reveal extraordinary courage and ingenuity. Surviving Templars had to navigate a world hostile to their existence while maintaining operational effectiveness, preserving treasure, and ensuring that the lessons of the Order were transmitted accurately. Their success depended on intelligence, adaptability, and a deep understanding of human behavior, skills honed through decades of training and practice. By operating in the shadows, they demonstrated that influence could be maintained without visibility, that survival required both strategic patience and ethical commitment, and that disappearance itself could be a tool of power. The vanished fleet's cultural and historical legacy is therefore multi-layered. It represents not only a tactical achievement but a strategic vision, the ability to preserve agency in the face of overwhelming odds, and the transmission of knowledge, influence, and ethical principles across time. Its impact is felt in the structures, rituals, and ethos of later organizations, in folklore and legend, and in the persistent fascination with the Templars as an archetype of hidden power. By disappearing into history while leaving behind tangible and intangible legacies, the Order demonstrated an unparalleled mastery of survival, influence, and psychological strategy. Even centuries later, the Templars' influence is visible in the enduring allure of secret knowledge, hidden treasure, and clandestine operations. Historians, writers, and enthusiasts continue to speculate about the paths the vanished fleet took, the treasures it carried, and the knowledge it preserved. These investigations are more than historical exercises. They are attempts to trace the lingering influence of an organization that, through planning, courage, and secrecy, transformed disappearance into a lasting form of power. The vanished fleet remains a symbol of what can be achieved when discipline, strategy, and human ingenuity are combined in service of purpose. Ultimately, the vanished fleet and the networks it preserved became a bridge between the medieval world and later generations of secretive and influential organizations. Its disappearance ensured that the Templars' lessons in discipline, loyalty, strategy, and secrecy survived, transmitted through symbols, practices, and legends. The Order's story was not one of annihilation but of transformation, demonstrating that influence and legacy are not always defined by visibility but by careful planning, adaptation, and the courage to operate in the shadows. The fleet carried more than men and treasure. It carried the essence of an order whose echoes continue to shape imagination, strategy, and cultural consciousness centuries later. The question of where the vanished Templar fleet ultimately went has fascinated historians, adventurers, and storytellers for centuries. Beyond the well-documented possibilities of Portugal, Spain, and England, more audacious theories suggest that the fleet may have ventured into the wider Atlantic, perhaps even reaching lands unknown to European eyes at the time. The Templars were exceptional navigators, trained not only to sail in the Mediterranean but also to read currents, winds, and stars with a precision that few others could match. Their ships, carefully maintained and crewed by disciplined men, were capable of long voyages that most contemporaries would have deemed perilous. To imagine the fleet sailing into uncharted waters is not merely speculation. It is a plausible continuation of a strategy defined by secrecy, foresight, and ambition. Some theorists argue that the fleet may have followed the Portuguese coast before veering westward, carried by the currents of the North Atlantic. The Templars had long-standing connections with maritime communities and understood the importance of seasonal winds and ocean currents. By timing their voyage carefully, they could have avoided detection while making remarkable progress across the open sea. Such a journey would have required extraordinary skill and coordination, as well as meticulous rationing of provisions and water. The very idea that the fleet could have reached distant shores speaks to the Templars' combination of courage, training, and tactical ingenuity. The possibility of a transatlantic voyage is further fueled by legends and early reports of European-like artifacts appearing in the Americas centuries before Columbus. While much of this evidence is anecdotal and often disputed, the consistency of some accounts is striking. Tales of metalwork, Coins or stone carvings suggestive of European origin have been found in regions far from known contact with the Old World. If even a portion of the Templar fleet reached the Atlantic and explored or established temporary settlements, it could explain the emergence of these anomalies. The fleet may have carried treasure, sacred relics, and documents not only to preserve the Order's legacy but also to stake claims or establish hidden footholds in distant lands. One particularly tantalizing theory suggests that the Templars may have sought refuge on islands scattered across the Atlantic, such as Madeira or the Azores, both of which were sparsely inhabited or entirely uninhabited at the time. These islands could have served as strategic waypoints, allowing ships to rest, replenish supplies, and communicate with hidden allies in Europe via smaller vessels. Such islands would also provide a measure of isolation, keeping the fleet and its cargo out of the reach of prying eyes. The Templars' knowledge of geography, combined with their maritime skill, would have made such a strategy both feasible and practical, creating a network of hidden havens even in the vast expanse of the Atlantic. The idea of secret exploration is reinforced by the Templars' intellectual pursuits. Beyond their martial and financial expertise, the Order was known to have preserved extensive knowledge from the Holy Land, including mathematical, astronomical, and navigational insights. Such knowledge would have been invaluable in transatlantic navigation, allowing the fleet to chart courses across previously untraversed waters with remarkable accuracy. If these theories hold weight, the fleet was not merely fleeing persecution. It was carrying the tools and expertise necessary to extend the Order's influence into realms beyond contemporary Europe, transforming disappearance into strategic expansion. Some speculate that the fleet may have made contact with indigenous populations along the Atlantic coast, either in South America, the Caribbean, or North America. Accounts of early settlements describe figures with armor, weapons, or customs unfamiliar to local communities. Though these stories are often difficult to verify, it is possible that the Templars, seeking isolated areas for refuge, interacted cautiously with native peoples, exchanging goods or knowledge in ways that left only subtle traces in the historical record. Such interactions, if they occurred, would have required diplomacy, discretion, and adaptability, demonstrating the Templars' capacity to operate in foreign and potentially hostile environments without compromising their mission. Another element fueling speculation is the notion that the fleet may have been tasked with safeguarding highly sensitive knowledge or relics that could alter religious or political balances in Europe. By moving these assets across vast distances, the Templars ensured that they would remain out of reach of the French crown and papal authorities. The fleet, therefore, was not merely a refugee caravan but a mobile repository of the Order's most valuable treasures: material, spiritual, and intellectual. If they did venture beyond Europe, the implications are profound. The Order would have transformed from a European institution into a hidden, transoceanic network capable of exerting influence in ways that defy conventional historical narratives. The psychological impact of such a possibility is immense. Imagine the fear and frustration of European authorities who believed the Templars destroyed, only for whispers to emerge of a fleet navigating uncharted waters, carrying treasure and secrets that could tip the balance of power. Even without concrete evidence, the mere suggestion of such a voyage adds layers of intrigue and mystique to the Templar story. It reinforces the perception that the Order was not easily defeated, that its members were capable of extraordinary feats, and that disappearance itself could be a form of strategic power. The logistics of a transatlantic voyage would have required unprecedented coordination. Provisions, fresh water, navigational tools, and repair materials had to be carefully managed for months at sea. The fleet would have needed skilled sailors capable of handling storms, navigating by stars, and maintaining discipline under extreme conditions. Knights aboard the ships would have had to balance the protection of treasure and relics with the practical demands of survival, while maintaining secrecy and morale. The Templars' training and organizational expertise suggest that such a feat, while daunting, was within the realm of possibility for an Order accustomed to operating under constant threat. The notion that the fleet may have reached unknown lands also intersects with stories of secret societies that emerged in later centuries, claiming esoteric knowledge and ties to distant, hidden traditions. Some argue that the transmission of such knowledge, through networks connected to the vanished fleet, influenced exploration, trade, and even the philosophical frameworks of these societies. The fleet, by carrying both material and intellectual capital, could have been a catalyst for the spread of hidden knowledge, creating legacies that would ripple through centuries of European and Atlantic history. Maritime hazards, of course, make these theories controversial. Storms, piracy, and navigational errors could easily have destroyed parts of the fleet. Yet it is precisely this possibility that adds to the fascination. The idea that a disciplined, resourceful, and strategically minded fleet could survive against the odds, leaving only fragments, rumors, or subtle evidence in distant lands. Every unexplained artifact, legend, or anomaly becomes a potential breadcrumb, a trace of the fleet's audacious journey, sparking curiosity, debate, and speculation centuries later. Some theorists propose that the fleet's ultimate destination may have included hidden enclaves on the fringes of Europe's known world, territories untouched by conventional powers. Remote islands, coastal caves, and rivers deep inland could have provided the order with temporary bases, allowing treasure and personnel to be dispersed, hidden, or relocated according to need. Such movements would have allowed the Templars to maintain operational flexibility, reducing the risk of total loss and ensuring that even if one element of the fleet or its cargo was compromised, the broader mission could continue. The fleet's hypothetical transatlantic voyage also aligns with legends of European artifacts and structures found in unexpected places in the Americas. While much of this evidence is anecdotal or disputed, the persistence of these stories suggests a lingering possibility that Templar voyages reached beyond the Old World. Coins, inscriptions, and architectural motifs that do not match local patterns invite speculation about early, hidden European contact, potentially linked to the fleet's survival strategy. These anomalies, whether factual or mythic, contribute to the enduring mystery of the vanished fleet and its audacious voyage into the unknown. Ultimately, the theories of transatlantic exploration transform the Templars' disappearance into a narrative of strategic expansion, courage, and foresight. The fleet was more than a group of fleeing ships. It was a mobile operation, capable of safeguarding treasure, transmitting knowledge, and establishing hidden networks far beyond the immediate reach of their pursuers. If even a portion of the fleet reached distant shores, the implications for history, legend, and the perception of the order are staggering. The vanished fleet becomes a symbol of ambition, ingenuity, and the enduring human desire to preserve knowledge and influence, even in the face of overwhelming danger. The persistence of these theories, regardless of concrete proof, speaks to the psychological and cultural impact of the fleet. Its disappearance inspired imagination, speculation, and a reevaluation of what is possible when human skill, courage, and secrecy intersect. The idea that a fleet of disciplined, resourceful knights could traverse uncharted waters, protect treasure, and carry knowledge to new lands challenges assumptions about the limitations of medieval Europe and invites us to reconsider the boundaries between history and legend. Even today, the notion of the vanished fleet crossing the Atlantic evokes awe. It suggests a boldness, precision, and strategic vision rarely matched in history. The fleet, whether ultimately reaching distant islands, unknown continents, or remaining in secret European enclaves, represents the intersection of survival, ambition, and human ingenuity. Its story continues to captivate, reminding us that the Templars were not merely a medieval order extinguished by kings and popes, but a force capable of vanishing into the unknown, while leaving an enduring mark on history, legend, and the human imagination. The fleet's potential transatlantic voyage ultimately emphasizes the Templars' mastery of risk, secrecy, and strategic planning. They were able to convert disappearance into influence, transforming vulnerability into opportunity. The ships, treasure, documents, and men together created a mobile, self-sustaining system capable of extending the order's reach far beyond the perception of contemporaries. Whether their final destinations were islands in the Atlantic, the Americas, or secret enclaves in Europe, the fleet embodies the idea that true power often lies not in visibility, but in foresight, preparation, and the courage to navigate uncharted waters, both literal and metaphorical.